DK. Welcome to Libercast. Libercast is actually one of the speakers for the summit. So nice to hear from you guys. Anyone else out there just tuning in? Hey, thank you, Aaron. Aaron Butler, my co-host for the summit. He actually put it on the network, the One Great Work Network, the live stream. Appreciate that. All right. Okie dokie. We're going to start up real soon. Going over day 2 replays, basically. And just gonna maybe wait a second, see if anyone else wants to join, but not a lot of people know about the live streams. There was an impromptu decision last second. Hello, Elaine. Welcome. But I hope you guys have been enjoying the event so far. If you signed up for the summit and been watching some of the talks, I know even my sister was watching all of them too. I like day 2 a lot, and I think it actually just gets better as time moves on. You know, maybe tomorrow I should put on some like nature footage or something. You know, maybe tomorrow I should. But sorry for the feedback. But yeah, maybe I should have some moving pictures, not just a still screen. It's a good thumbnail though. Nice to see you guys. Alrighty. We're gonna start it up. And I'm gonna do my little intro I usually do. What's up? How's it going? Figured I'd put the tree in the background too, but if you hear some background noise, it's because it's usual. If you see some cream on my face, it's because, I mean, listen, I used some like Japanese hair care thing, and it worked out pretty stinking cool, but then it made my skin like allergic, so I'm like, darn it, man. Never stinking happens. Anyways, yeah, so that's how my streams usually operated. I usually just talk about random stuff, but yesterday was great, and you know, the premiere before that was even better. It was like epic, and it had like a super fancy intro. For those of you who tuned in live, it was like midnight when that happened. But I'm glad that you guys are here, and today we're going to do some replay stuff as well for the summit. For day 2, and what I mean by that is we will be watching Larken Rose in particular. The 2 other interviews are a bit more controversial. I mean, everything is controversial, let's be real, especially in today's world, but Larken Rose's interview is a little less, particularly because it's not dealing with, I don't know, 9/11 and certain topics that are very touchy on YouTube in particular. I don't think Twitch cares as much. But nonetheless, Larken Rose's interview is very focused on the topic of slavery as well. And, you know, I displayed some footage from China yesterday, which was pretty heartbreaking, you know, like seeing what's going on in China, and then you know, you look at some historic events as well, and it's basically proof of what a lot of the speakers are talking about. You know, David Rodriguez is another speaker, aside from Larken Rose on day 2, and he goes over schooling. So I'm not sure if you guys checked that one out, but I love that interview as well. Very high energy. The guy is just on top of things. So I think you guys will enjoy that if you haven't seen it yet. But we're going to start with Larken Rose today, so that's what we're going to do. And if you guys are curious of what I'm always looking over, I'm always looking at this side of the screens because that's where my chat is. So I'm not like reading off of anything. I don't read off of scripts. But this is kombucha. I made this kombucha homemade, basically. Green tea. I don't like to use black tea. It's like, basically, there's different types of black tea, right? But green tea is not burnt per se. Usually it's healthier than black tea for many different reasons. The caffeine doesn't affect you as much either. It's fermented, being that it's kombucha, so I had it sit out for 20 something days, right? You just have some sugar, the bacteria feeds on the sugar, boom, you got kombucha. But you have to start with a SCOBY, and I actually got a SCOBY, which is like a bacterial yeast from a local Amish market. Or not Amish, but Mennonite, similar, but it's very cool. You know, if you haven't gone to local markets like that, by the way, which is sort of like contributing to voluntarism and sort of like, you know, creating a free world that we want, then I recommend doing so, because you will be able to get a lot of high quality products. You know, finding raw butter, by the way, is like almost impossible in many places in the world, especially in the United States. I mean, you look at different states, it's straight up, you're not allowed. I mean, this is just crazy. And raw butter, it's like, you think it's such a simple thing. It's like actually takes less steps because you're not processing it, you're not pasteurizing it, but yet it's harder to get. It's like, wow, just because it's become custom, it's become tradition to just heat up everything and just burn it. And, you know, we tend to roast coffee and roast tea, and so I tend to stick to some of the more raw type of stuff. But yeah, don't know how you guys feel about that. I figured to share because the kombucha is very good, and it's honestly very simple. I didn't add any flavors to this. It's just straight up green tea and pure raw cane sugar. Non-GMO, of course. I tried to get someone else on the event. Yeah, you're talking about Vinny Eastwood. It's okay. There's a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people who are not on the event, even though we have about 50 speakers, right? There's a lot of people who aren't on the event. And that's just because, well, it's like I did my best as one individual, right? And I tried reaching out, over 6 months. And if people followed the instructions and they sent me the email, then, they were a part of it. But I know the thing is that the next project can include pretty much anyone and everyone. And that's what's really cool about the next project. You'll hear about the next project toward the end of the summit. So you'll stay tuned for that. Some of you probably already know sort of what it is, but a lot of great plans to come. And yeah, it's cool that Vinny is making a documentary. Absolutely. Larkin Rose, working on his movie. All this stuff will also be shared in the summit in case you guys don't know about this. Like, I want to help people with their projects and what they're funding as well, totally. Someone's probably like tuning into the stream like, what is that cream on his face still? Like, what is that? But yeah, we're gonna hop right into it. We're gonna start watching Larkin Rose's interview. So thank you guys for joining me, and it's cool. We're live streaming on YouTube and Twitch right now. Let's hop right into it. Thank you guys. Welcome. This is Corey Angelot. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, Larkin Rose and Amanda Rose. They are outspoken advocates for the principles of self-ownership, non-aggression, and a stateless society. They are also the creator of many articles and videos and even books and now even movies. Incredible, honestly. Their work is, in my view, looking at the root cause of what's going on in the world. Larkin Rose, your book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is something I've lended to many different friends of mine. And it's one that I truly think will change the world and is changing the world right now. It's changing so many people's lives through their understanding that here is something that is at the root to everything that's going on in today's world, at least most of the evil that we see, if not all of it. And so I want you to share, a little bit more about these projects you have coming up as we move along in this interview. But welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm glad to have you on as a speaker. I never thought I'd get to speak to you about these topics, but I think you're one of the best to talk about with this because I've seen you in different interviews talking about, Frederick Douglass and some of the abolitionists of the past and how this can relate to slavery, this belief system, the most dangerous superstition you call statism. So what is slavery and how does it still exist today?
Well, in a nutshell, slavery is the idea that one person can own somebody else. And all ownership means, whether you're talking about a person or a chair, is you have the exclusive right to decide what's done with that. So if I own my car, I can give it away. I can park it in a field. I can drive it off a cliff. I can sell it to somebody. It's mine. And it's a little bit weird to talk about ourselves as if we own ourselves, but I often use that phrase. It's a little bit schizophrenic to say you own yourself. But I use that phrase because everybody understands what it means. And there are only two choices. There is you own yourself or you're a slave because somebody else owns you, whether it's one person or 50 people or a Congress or whatever it is. Somebody has the right and the final say over what is done with your time and your effort and your body. If it isn't you, that's slavery. It's that simple.
Okay. Now, what is statism in relation to slavery? Do they have a connection that we need to understand?
Absolutely. Statism is just the modern manifestation of slavery. And whereas the old slavery was very openly just claiming, hey, I own you because I say so, like we captured you or bought you or something, and now you're my property. Now because people wouldn't mostly fall for that these days, they have to use rhetoric and terminology and excuses and justifications that are way more convoluted and twisted and weird. And they say things like, well, now I get to steal some of your money because I'm representing you for the common good and yada, yada, yada. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people saying, we get to take the fruits of your labor without your consent. And we'll pretend you consented by like being anywhere on half a continent as if that's consent. But it's basically just a more elaborate excuse for slavery to dupe more sophisticated human beings into accepting it and going along with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And you guys have had personal experiences. I have had personal experiences with this belief system. We're quite outspoken with it. But to the person out there, a lot of people in today's world, they don't know about this belief system, and they think slavery has long been gone. So, I like to say that slavery was chattel slavery, and there's other forms of slavery. And even, some of the slaves themselves were saying there's this mentality behind it, and there's the physical and mental part of it, regardless of what we title it. And people like Lysander Spooner were saying that if it wasn't for these political institutions, they basically gave the ability for the chattel slave owners to maintain or intensify that slavery in the very first place. You need an organized monopoly on violence in order to create that scenario. Would you agree with that? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I think one way in which my approach is different than the way a lot of people describe it is so many people focus on the slave masters and how bad they are. And yes, they are. And the institution of slavery and how bad it is. And even the institution of government and authoritarianism and fascism and communism and all the different flavors of slavery and human beings dominating each other by force. My focus is on the mindset of the victims of it, way more so than on the mindset of the perpetrators. Because there's going to be a handful of power happy psychos, as far as I can tell, till the end of time. That isn't what actually determines what happens. What determines what happens is the mindset of the potential victims. And a thing that I think a lot of people just cannot relate to now is trying to imagine that slaves in chattel slavery, they thought they were supposed to be slaves. They thought they were the rightful property of the master. And to us, from our perspective, we can just go, they can't possibly have thought that. And if they didn't think that, how on earth is, one lazy white guy sitting around in a big house going to forcibly control a whole bunch of like strong, healthy slaves? You cannot control them physically if you don't control them mentally. To me, what is both scary and hopeful is that right now, the same problem exists. It's a different flavor of slavery, but the same problem exists in that the people who are being victimized by authoritarian extortion and domination, they have been taught to believe that it's perfectly fine. It's necessary. It's essential. It's legitimate. This is how things are. This is how things have to be. This is how things will always be. And they have all of the same mental traits that Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, described in his fellow slaves when he described his own process of escaping the mentality. And to us, it seems like, well, this is obvious, but to him, it was like a process of realizing, I don't think this is okay. Like, why do we have to work for that guy? And like, why does he claim to own us? Now, for us living here and now, we'd go, well, that's obvious. Yeah, it's obvious because that's not something we were indoctrinated into. What we were indoctrinated into is be a good law-abiding taxpayer and do as you're told and follow the rules. And if you don't, you deserve whatever the legislation and legislators do to you because you have an obligation. It's the same mentality. And the reason I find hope in that is because if you change the mentality of the victims, it's over. You don't have to change the tyrants. You don't have to overthrow them. You don't have to do anything to them if you can get their intended victims to realize we own ourselves. We're not beholden to these psychos. No election, no constitution, none of their weird rituals actually make it legitimate for them to forcibly dominate us. But it is a huge mental shift that people have to go through, just like it was a huge mental shift for Frederick Douglass to figure out this isn't okay. I'm not this guy's property. I don't have an obligation to work for him. I would be perfectly justified in running away or kicking his butt or something, doing whatever I have to reclaim ownership of myself. But the mental process has to happen first, which is why pretty much every project I do focuses on trying to get the victims of authoritarianism out of the slave mentality.
And there's a lot more victims than there are perpetrators, would you say? But you're saying the victims are in part responsible for the world that essentially is being created. So it's not really, the blame is not to be put on the slave masters at all, because it's the victims who are being complacent, who are saying, I'm willing to submit, I'm willing to give my money to these people.
Well, when it comes to blame, there's the essence of malice, like the tyrants and the slave masters actually are, intentionally doing something nasty, but the victims who go along with it, who are just duped and deceived and brainwashed, they are the ones funding and empowering these tyrants. And if their victims weren't doing that, like you look at every tyrannical regime and you think, oh, the big nasty tyrant at the top. Well, where did his power come from? Where did he get all this money and his tanks and his bombs and stuff? Oh, they were paid for by the law-abiding taxpayers, and the trigger fingers pulling the guns for him were the normal people who chose to be thugs for the state, whether it's this country or any other country. And so it's so hard for people to realize, if they're good people and well-intentioned, that they're the problem. And I'm just going to say it bluntly. If you believe in government and you vote and you believe in the Constitution and democracy, you are the problem, not because you're malicious, not because you're stupid, not because you're evil, but you are absolutely the problem because you've been taught to believe a lie, and all of your perceptions and your words and your actions are a result of you falling for that lie and reinforcing and legitimizing your own victimization. So that's my slightly long-winded answer to that one.
So why do people believe in this thing? Like what brought people onto this? If it's sort of like a voluntarily slave relationship, I mean, of course there is some violence for people like us who don't want to be a part of that system, but there's a lot of people who do want to be a part of that system, and they want to partake in these rituals, and they may think it's even justified, if not necessary or moral, as a duty to give their money away to these people. So why do people believe that they should?
Well, there's a massive amount of indoctrination that people go through that they don't even recognize as that. They just think, oh, we learn things growing up. We learned Civics 101, which is how to bow to a ruling class. We learn respect authority and obey the rules, which is how to submit your own will to the dictates of an authority. And it's
or we learn self-contradictory phrases that we repeat, like consent of the governed, which is actually a logical impossibility. There is no such thing.
Yeah, because if it's consent, then it's voluntary, and if it's being governed, it's coercion. And we're taught these things, and if we think that that's just reality, then you don't recognize it as indoctrination. You just think, oh, well, this is how things are, and good people pay their taxes and obey the law and yada, yada, yada. And the amount of indoctrination, the amount of the message of authoritarianism is just everywhere, but I don't know anybody who notices it until after they've given up the belief in authority. And then they notice it everywhere. They're like, how did I not notice? We're just bombarded with it everywhere from all sides, from the parents, from the teachers, from the politicians, from the cops, from the bureaucrats, from the media, from pretty much everybody we know, because they all believe the same status stuff. So we think we're growing up as these, learned, thoughtful, independent thinking beings, and no, we're not. Like, we are massively indoctrinated, which is why it's such a slow, uncomfortable process for so many people to get out of that. Because if you come up to somebody and you say your view of reality and the world and society is completely upside down and you're accidentally supporting evil, nobody's going to want to say, yep, that's me. I'm the bad guy. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm the idiot. I'm the gullible moron who fell for something evil. They want to imagine that, well, you're just extreme or weird or something because I can't be the problem. And the trouble is, until people can consider the possibility that they're accidentally being the problem, they're going to keep being the problem.
So what if people think this is kind of extreme? What if they think, well, what you're saying, well, all authority, well, what about the founding fathers and what they were talking about? They were sharing the same message of, well, we need to educate the public, and that's the way they attained their freedom. And, you know, a lot of people look at it like, wow, well, we need to restore what they gave to us because, you know, they were creating a small government just for basic functions like protecting the people. Do you think that's a justified notion of looking at reality and them saying, well, this doesn't seem practical. It's never been used in history. And, you know, although the founding fathers had slaves, they were against it. They were just trying to move there.
It's so funny to me how people automatically jump to the question of practicality when their moral assumptions are challenged. And it's a little bit cliche, but I like to use the example of, you know, if somebody's saying, let's end, you know, chattel slavery, and then somebody else says, well, who's going to pick the cotton? It doesn't matter who's going to pick the cotton. Slavery is evil. End it. Now, after it's ended, we can figure out what to do about the cotton. You know, maybe that industry crashes and burns. Maybe we invent the cotton gin. Like, but that isn't a reason to keep doing evil stuff. But it's natural and to be expected. We do a course called Candles in the Dark that's about talking to people about these things in a way that makes their head not explode, makes them not get defensive and argumentative and stuff. But trying to get through their own indoctrination and thinking that, well, we have to have some form of government, or the Constitution is good. Like, there has to be some flavor of somebody's in charge of me that's valid and legitimate and necessary. And the process of all the way letting go of that and saying, whether or not it works, it's immoral. Slavery is immoral. Whatever you call it, slavery is immoral. So to say that, well, I'm not sure how it would work if government didn't forcibly dominate us and steal our money. Well, does that mean that morality is just out the window because you're not sure how it's going to work? And to me, that's just a weird excuse. And I don't pretend to know the detail of how everything is going to work. If I did, I would be running for Emperor of Anarchy. The whole point is, when you leave 7 billion or however many people in freedom, they have the ability to find voluntary solutions to things. Whereas in a society with a ruling class, they're all getting stomped on and robbed to fund the government solutions to things, which are always like way counterproductive. Not only do they not work, they make everything way worse. But when people jump to the practical, it's usually because they're getting uncomfortable looking at the fact that they're literally cheering for evil, because they've been taught to believe, well, you have to, like, one way or another, you have to vote for somebody to dominate and rob all your neighbors because that's the system we have. That's democracy, yada, yada, yada. And when confronted with the idea that they're helping to cheer for something genuinely destructive and evil, their brain sort of runs off on the excuse of, well, then tell me how everything will work. It's like, I don't have to tell you how everything would work in order to ask you to please not cheer for evil. Now, I have some ideas and predictions, and lots of other people have written, you know, whole books and treatises on how things can work without a ruling class. But to me, that comes second. The moral question of, is slavery okay? That's what matters. And the answer is no, it isn't. Even if the cotton industry collapses, still not okay. Even if you think, but how will we care for the poor? And even if the roads were bad, even whatever you imagine might happen, you know, less than ideally without a ruling class, that doesn't make it okay for people to violently dominate each other. And that's what government always is.
So I see, like, based on what you're saying, it's sort of like understanding, well, there's evil, there's always going to be evil, but the question is, are there people who are allowing that evil to grow, through this belief system and giving certain people the excuse to everyday morality? Morality, it's like, yeah, you and I understand violence is wrong, yet these people, this class of individuals who claim to put some fancy pieces of paper and some writing, they claim to have an exemption to that morality. Why is that? So I do ask a lot of questions. I know in your Candles in the Dark, you ask a lot of questions. It's something that I always encourage people to do, is just look around the world and ask themselves questions. But that is what the abolitionists were doing too back then. A lot of them were not using politics as a means for change because they saw politics was actually connected to slavery, which was quite interesting. A lot of the abolitionists, at least, and some of them got really attacked for those views, of course, because they're like, well, wait, you can't have change without politics, and so some of them, Lysander Spooner was against the Constitution, but he used it as a means to say, well, hey, slavery is unconstitutional. But the Constitution still is still not valid. Like, he used that as a strategy to appeal to the lawyers at the time. He understood that there was a lot of layers to slavery, and chattel slavery was just that one layer that had to be tackled. Maybe like the founding fathers who were, rebelling against the British, that was their own slavery, perhaps. It's like, I want to be free from the British, but then they had slaves of their own, which was a separate issue, and everybody was like, we need to free the slaves at the same time. They're like, could we do both at once? I don't know. It seems like it's an evolutionary progress, Larkin. Do you think this is going to take time for humanity to transition to these ideas, or do you think these ideas are for the right time? Like the abolitionists said, they want immediate abolition, not gradual, because what is right and what is wrong is wrong. If you allow any wrong, it continues to grow. What do you think? Does there need to be a transition process?
There won't ever be a political transition process. That's like asking slave owners to slowly, gently give up their slaves. Like, when has that ever happened in the history of the world? What will be gradual is the number of people figuring this out and escaping the mental enslavement. And the more people who do that, the easier it becomes to just ignore the ruling class until they can't do anything. I mean, if there's 2 or 3 or 10 of you and you try to ignore them, you get a tank in your living room. But if there's 50 million of you and you ignore them, they go, oh, well, that's unfortunate because we can't nearly do that. And a bunch of the people who would have been our enforcers are now the ones ignoring us. And the whole game falls apart. So the people who hope to get from where we are to freedom by doing this backwards, well, we have to vote for smaller government and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't ever work that way, because as soon as you accept the premise of there's a ruling class that has a right to control me and take my money, you have no control over that. It's like as soon as you accepted that you are somebody else's slave, to say that, well, maybe we can beg the master to slowly give us more and more freedom and then eventually let us go. Why would he do that? If he wanted to do that, he wouldn't own you in the first place. If people in government wanted us to be free, they wouldn't have sought out positions from which they can steal our money and violently dominate us. So the idea that, and it's a digital choice, there's no grayscale. I own myself or somebody else owns me. Those are the options. And if somebody else sort of owns me and they're going to be kind of nice about it, we're going to have limited government where they only steal this much instead of this much. I'm still 100% a slave, because it's still their choice how much of my time and effort to take from me. And it's their choice how many of my choices to violently control. And as long as it's their choice, I'm 0% free, even if they're nice. Because there were nicer slave masters and more sadistic slave masters, and they were all 100% illegitimate, because they all claimed, well, I get to decide how nice I'm going to be to you, but don't worry, I'll be nice. It's like, I'm worried. Like, I don't care if you're going to be nice. If you think you own me, we already have a problem. And so there's either politics or there's anarchy. There's rule by someone or there's rule by no one. Those are the options, and those are the only options.
And it's funny because a lot of people tend to think, like, I had a libertarian phase, and almost all my anarchist friends had a libertarian phase, and they all sort of think at first that, like, like they think of libertarianism as like on the spectrum of freedom, and it isn't. It's still right. It's like their politics is a spectrum and the freedom is over here. And it's like politics is just redistributed theft, and you can have a heavy version of it and you can have a light version of it. But when libertarians realize they're doing slavery light, and it's a lose game either way, and there's no freedom attained through that method, then they just leap off and they go to anarchism. It's not that libertarianism is on the way to it. It's that some people pass through that in their thinking temporarily because they're trying to grasp for something outside of the box they know is wrong. And that's the first thing they kind of go to, because they go, well, yeah, like you said, it's like an evolution. They go to, well, okay, well, that looks better, certainly. And I went there first. And then it was like, wait a minute, though. Wait a minute. Like it doesn't actually make sense. If I put my guy on the throne, even if I put my libertarian guy on the throne, because he's going to save the day, and he's going to get those laws repealed, and he's going to grant back my freedom.
Gonna tell me I'm allowed.
I don't know how many times I have to spell this out for people, but man, if it has to be granted to you, if you have to wait for it to be given to you, if you have to ask for it back, if it has to be petitioned, it is not freedom. And so that is why when people really have the breakthrough, they have a real breakthrough. They don't tend to go backwards from being a full voluntarist or liberty-minded person, because they're off the spectrum. They finally realize, whoa, this whole thing is rearranging theft. That's really all it is. So it has to sit on top of coercion at the end of the day. And so all I'm doing is doing a light version of that and pretending I'm not, when I'm doing the libertarian version of it.
And to be fair, you mean the political libertarians,
not libertarian.
Capital
Capital L. Like you're running for politics thinking our clown needs to be on the
add
throne, because if we get our
circus.
third party, and by golly, we'll be granted our freedom. Like that's not how freedom works, baby.
One of the most awesome things I read from Frederick Douglass, I read his autobiography, a number of his works, while I was in prison for not bowing to the IRS, which is interesting thing to read about slavery while you're in a cage for not paying money to your master. But one of the most amazing things was reading his account of how at some point the master said, I will let you go and work for other people, and I'll even let you keep a little bit of the money. Of course, I get most of it and I decide how much I take, but I'll let you go work and earn money of your very own. Aren't I generous? And Frederick Douglass explained how at first he was all excited. He was like, this is awesome. I can go out and work hard and have my own money. And then he realized this is worse than just direct slavery, because it's me pretending that he's being nice to me. Well, if I'm entitled to any of it, I'm entitled to all of it. Like it's my work. And so Frederick Douglass basically figured out that an income tax is worse than direct slavery, because of the mental implications that they're letting you keep some, which is 100% slavery, because it's saying it's their decision, but you're supposed to be thankful and grateful that they didn't take 100% of it. So I almost fell out of my chair when I read a former slave basically saying that an income tax is worse than direct slavery because of what it implies. Because if somebody just comes up and says, you're going to work for me or I'm going to hurt you, at least it's brutally honest. It's completely evil and immoral, but it's honest. But if they say, oh, we're just going to take some of you, we'll decide how much we take, but we'll let you keep some. It's like the carjackers. I'm going to let you keep your wallet. I'm taking your car, but I'm so benevolent that I'm going to let you keep your wallet. It's like, why would you think you get positive points when you're robbing me at gunpoint? And that is what the income tax is masters pretending that they're kind because they didn't take all of it. And it was so funny to read Frederick Douglass, his explanation of him figuring out this is somehow worse. This is a bigger insult than just saying, do what I say because I own you. It's even worse because it kind of admits that your effort and your time and effort belong to you, but not really. I'll decide how much to take anyway.
It's this insidious vampirism on a person that when you do that generationally, and then you have generations removed from this that they're just in this world now. They have no idea what's going on. They don't know they don't know. And now they're a part of this, and it becomes even more insidious because there is no overt guy with a whip and a chain anymore. This is the luxury of America, where even the poor are entitled to have smartphones, god damn it. So people have nice distractions and they have pretty things, and they don't have a guy browbeating them every day. So when you try to tell them they're a slave, and they don't particularly see it like that, you know, and they can't see it that way, it's more insidious, it's more creepy, because now we have this generationally, and people are just like, yeah, I guess I go and work, and then some people just take a bunch of my paycheck for some reason, and everyone tolerates that. Oh, well, not going to try too hard to fight that because everybody else is doing it, and people just accept that
Guess
because
that's life. The only two certain things in life are death and taxes. Like, guess who made that up? The beneficiaries of the theft.
Pretty sure.
Well, and that, I mean, that so obviously ties in with the movie project that we are nearing completion of, the Jones Plantation, because I'm not going to spoil it or anything. But what I want people thinking when they walk out of the theater, I want them looking around. Like, so many people, they go to movies as an escape. Rah, 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 yay, what's for dinner? Go back to the real life. I want them to walk out of the theater, or, you know, it's their living room, wherever they're watching it, walk out into the real world and go, ah, damn it. It's this. It's all this. And everywhere they turn, every political campaign, I want them to recognize
It's all that.
this is what was done to us. This is like, that movie wasn't an allegory. It was a description of reality. And I think it's going to do that to a lot of people. And I think even a bunch of the cast members who they didn't know me, they didn't know my stuff, but going through the script, they were like, whoa, this is deep. I'm going to have to like reconsider some things about the world I live in now. So I have high hopes of it traumatizing a lot of people, but in a good way.
The behind the scenes was cool because they did a little behind the scenes special where they had thrown together some footage, and one of the girls that we knew, that she was working backstage, she was like the coordinator that kept everything glued together on the crew, and she was like cool to see in the interview behind the scenes, because, you know, we didn't know her until she's a crew member. We don't know till this is all going down, and we don't know how she's being affected by this. And then I saw her in the behind the scenes special, you know, say to the camera, like, yeah, you know, this, like, she basically said, it makes me think about, would she say something like, am I really leading my own life? And who's really in charge of me, or am I really in charge of my own life? It was basically something like that, she said. And I thought, wow, that, I didn't even realize it had affected her that way, that she was already looking at that and it was hitting her that way while she was looking at the story. But people were definitely excited about it. So, and their excitement is my excitement too, because I'm already there with them. But to see people that don't know this script, they're not even there with us in this mindset, and they're like, so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who don't see the roots to where freedom comes down to, and I think the 1800s is a good reference that we can look back at, because it's somewhat recent, which should be surprising for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The fact that for thousands of years people accepted the notion of chattel slavery as if it's perfectly normal and to society, and all of a sudden everybody now thinks it's really immoral and should never even be tried. People don't even attempt, you know. It's become such a societal moral. And I think that's the thing, right? It became part of the culture, the morality of the populace, the knowledge. As Frederick Douglass said, knowledge makes a slave unfit to be a slave. And the abolitionists were not, like, they were just hitting hard all the time. I read their newspapers, The Liberator and you know, the Pleasure Boat and the non-resistance movement as well, the spiritualists at the time. A lot of these guys were all talking about the government of God or natural law, which, you know, Mark Passio talks about, and using moral persuasion and moral power, as Aidan Ballou has also talked about, because of how powerful it is versus political power, which is only temporary, focused on people or events. But this is looking at ideas. It's looking at what are we destined to be. For me, I think it's a very powerful thing that you start to find a sense of purpose within it. And that's because you're starting to understand, like, this is who I am, this is who I'm meant to be. And as you gain self-control, you gain confidence, and you learn to understand, like, this is how you practice freedom. But so many people who look at politics or voting, they don't look at, well, wait, morality and knowledge is a prerequisite requirement for freedom. And so I think that is a huge connection. What you talked about with democracy, essentially, which is like, a master of slaves and slaves of masters, 51 over the 49%. The End of All Evil says it perfectly. It's perfect evil because people can't detect that it's evil. They have a artificial sense of security, artificial sense of freedom. I come across a lot of people today who are sovereigns, or people who call themselves sovereigns. They say they're sovereign citizens, as if you can be both at the same time. Or people who call themselves American state nationals, and they use paperwork and all this stuff to prove that they're free. But isn't that kind of similar to voting, and the fact that you're not actually free? You still require something man-made through some particular system. What are your thoughts on the people who do that when they say, "Oh, well, we can create freedom now. It's all voluntary. We're using the paperwork."
Yeah, all of that. And I came face to face with a whole bunch of that years and years ago when I was having my adventures with the IRS. And my adventures with the IRS was purely about a legal issue, even though I was already a voluntarist. Kind of the Lysander Spooner thing is, this is entirely bogus, top to bottom, start to finish. But as it happens, you're lying about your own rules, and I'm going to do that. But there's so many people, they still have the speck of authoritarianism in them. So they think, well, there has to be some trick and some paperwork to get the master to tell us we're allowed to be free. Like if you sign this and you write your name this way and you follow this, that, the other thing, and you claim you're a straw man and you blah, 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 like all this mythology, and a bunch of it is legally completely wrong. Some of it has some legal basis to it, but legal doesn't matter. As long as you're playing the legal game, you're accepting the premise that you need their permission. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to spoil anything, but the Jones Plantation totally covers the thing of not only democracy, but the idea of getting official permission and stuff to be free. And it was very frustrating to watch a lot of people think that, well, there must be something inside the system that lets us be free. Like, it's a system written by slave masters. Why would they put something in there that lets you be free?
Right. It's sort of like I have friends who have been like, they identified as sovereign citizen, and they try to go through that process and explain it. And there's two sort of mindsets. There's the mindset of like what you said, sort of, I still kind of, if I do this thing, they'll let me be free. And then there's the ones that are sovereign citizens, and they all the way don't think they have any, the authority has any control over them, and they don't feel beholden to authority. But the way I would put it is, they think of it as, they sort of think that they've discovered this weird authoritarians voodoo rituals that they go by, and if they do their magic voodoo rituals a certain way, they can get the gang to stay off their back. And I understand that mindset, except that in actual reality, a lot of them had to find out the hard way, which you already know, and we already know that's not how that works. They are actually just a gang. The mindset is a gang. When it's a gang mindset, all the scribbles are just, how can we write down something to justify what we're about to do to you? And then when they don't have it in the scribbles, they just find a way to do it anyway, if you are a honeypot. So what I tell people is, all that matters is, one, are you acting like you're beholden to them? And two, are you a honeypot at all that looks like you're an easy thing they can get something out of? And if you have no resources, if you can't, if you're good to set an example of, you have no resources, you don't look like you can defend yourself monetarily, physically, whatever, then that's they'll come after you. So what I tell people is, if you want to do the paperwork thing, cool. At best, what you did was maybe make yourself a slightly more difficult target for certain members of the gang if they target you at the wrong time and place. But at worst, what you absolutely just did is make them aware of who you are, put a giant red target on your head, and therefore, if they do want to mess with you and they think they can get away with it, then they can, and they will, because to them, they're just a gang who will go, these scribbles are just what we do to try to justify what we want to do. They're not a magical voodoo following cult that actually plays by their own rules. They just aren't.
And I should point out that when I was doing what I was doing with the IRS, I was telling everybody, first of all, I'm totally right on the legal issue and I can prove it. And that doesn't at all make me safe. I was telling people, don't do this. This is not the way to stay out of trouble. This is the way to intentionally get into trouble. But I'm going to show them for what they are for anybody who wants to watch. And a bunch of people watched, and they saw that government doesn't care about its own laws. on any level in any way. Neither do the courts, the prosecutors, the IRS, like none of them give a damn about their own laws. And so it would have been more fun to have somebody on a jury with a brain and win and have people see that they don't obey their own laws. But I said from the beginning, win or lose, I'm going to demonstrate that they don't care at all about the law. That's the scribbles they put out there to look legitimate and formal. And at the end of the day, they're going to do whatever they want. If they think you're a threat to their power, they're going to do whatever they have to shut you down. And so I told people, like, this isn't, I wasn't doing, I found this great cure, do this, say these magic words and you'll be fine. I was like, I found something true. And if you say it loudly enough, you'll probably get in trouble and get raided and prosecuted like I did. But I'm still going to do it anyway to show them for what they are, because I don't know anybody else in a better position. But I think just the mindset, like like what she said, I understand people like, well, I'm going to make it a pain in the neck for them to bother me at all. So maybe they'll go, like every bully, pick on an easier target.
Right.
Because that happens a lot. But when people actually are still in the mindset that the road to freedom is by way of the political and legislative scribbles, they're not even free inside their own head yet, because they still think they need somebody else's permission. Yeah. I sometimes use the analogy, if I was like kidnapped by some, cannibal headhunters, and I knew that doing some weird dance would make them go, oh, he knows the weird dance, we won't eat him. I would do the weird dance to not get eaten. Doesn't mean I believe in the weird dance.
Right.
It doesn't mean I think they have the right to eat me if I don't know the weird dance. It just means, okay, on a practical level, if this makes them not throw me in the pot and serve me for lunch, I'll do it. Dance. But what matters is the philosophical understanding that we all own ourselves and we're not beholden to these crooks, no matter what they write down, no matter what their scribbles say. Exactly. And I think that last step is very difficult for a lot of minarchists and constitutionalists and, libertarians and whatever you want to call them, because they're so indoctrinated into it that they still want a pro-freedom solution that doesn't go against the assumption of authority. And they haven't realized there cannot be such, not only is there no such thing, there can be no such thing. Because as long as you accept the premise of authority, you accept the premise that somebody has the right to rule you. And if you think somebody has the right to rule you, you are still in the slave mindset, and you will never be free until your own mindset changes. That's why what we focus on is the mindset of the victims, not trying to fix the sociopaths who are tricking them, but to free from the lie all the victims of this. Because when that happens, the sociopaths lose all their power.
I feel like a lot of people put so much money into politics and these mechanisms when a lot of it could be put into education, and a lot of people may just be afraid. They don't know how to educate, what methods to use. They're afraid of speaking of, oh my gosh, I don't know how to bring this to a world of people who are not going to listen. I think to some extent you have to accept that, and you have to realize and just be honest with yourself. I think a lot of what you just talked about, what comes to mind is honesty. Honesty, I think everything comes down to, whether it's following your own conscience as opposed to following someone's orders just because they tell you to do so, or it's doing the paperwork versus not, because paperwork is not the honest path to freedom. Freedom is freedom. Truth is truth. Do you need that medium, that man-made medium, to represent this natural force, may you say? And, again, of course, being in Mark Passio's community, I'm going to have a little bit of bias toward the natural law perspective, and I'll get your perspective on that a little bit later, perhaps. But I feel like those people are pulling onto a string where they feel like, if it works sometimes, and because they see it working to some extent toward freedom, they gain so much hope and faith in that process, as if they take it as if that is the truth, and that is what must be done. When I think there's a lot more that could be done than just these rituals or these things that have existed, that have longer existed, like the spoken word and our communicative abilities and you making movies. I mean, I think that is the most powerful. It's going to last forever, and you're not relying on faith or chance of, oh my gosh, if we vote this person office, they'll do this maybe, and then with our money they'll maybe do this, and then maybe through all these other branches and processes it'll happen. And maybe this individual will respect me as a human being and not a cop if I write my name a certain way. Like, it's
Yeah.
a lot of faith involved in the process. But at the end of the day, all it takes is for them to say, hey, coerce this person, and that order follower is going to do it because it's their job, it's their
Yeah.
duty, and they're paid money. As Lysander Spooner said, if a government's willing to take money from you, they're going to take that money and use it to coerce you as well with
Right.
their soldiers.
But I would point out that their enforcers are also victims of the lie. They're victimizers, they're perpetrators of immoral violence, but they were taught to believe in authority too. And you can see it in the way they talk. And again, after someone is out of that mindset and you look back at it, it's just insane. It's literally insane. But when you're in it, you just think, oh, this is how it is. When somebody's, there with a gun, kidnapping someone to put them in the cage and go, this wasn't my idea. I don't make the laws. I just enforce them. There's this thing somewhere called the law, and I can't point to it because it doesn't really exist, but it's making me beat the hell out of you and drag you off and put you in a cage. But it's not me. Don't blame me. I'm just following orders of something called government that I also can't point to. I can point to some people and you'll see that they're just people, but there's this mythical, magical thing that makes it okay for me to do this. And that's why my favorite thing is when their own enforcers learn the lie and let go. And I know a lot of former military and a few former cops who are now voluntarists and realize, wow, I was accidentally an agent of evil.
I interviewed
Sorry
some
about
of
that.
them. Yeah.
Wasn't trying to be.
I would say I think like the few cop friends we have that were all cops, and the cops stand out more to me, even more than military, because the cop is so much military. A lot of them are desk jockeys, but cops, that's a lot of that's the enforcement arm. It's where the rubber meets the road. And so it's surprising to me, and I almost have more respect for somebody who came through all the way through the indoctrination of being a cop, because every single one of those friends of ours had a moment where they told me different versions of a story where they basically had to come to grips with a moment while it was happening that, like, I'm the asshole here. I'm on the wrong side
right.
of this, and I don't want to be this. I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. And like, I think there has to be something in a person that can even be woken up to be there to begin with. And that's why I think sort of the enforcement arm of government is a very dividing line. It's very like, I think it's very like, you're either going to make it as a cop enforcer or you're not. And that's why we end up with those power trippers that are left there, because anyone with a conscience can only do it for so long. I think before they reach, they get beat. They're that person that's under there wanting freedom and knowing this is something wrong about what they're perpetrating on others, sort of knows better. And if it's there at all, it's going to eventually realize that something's wrong with what they're doing.
Yeah. And again, they're not the enemy. Like it's totally, not to be too cliche, but it's totally the Matrix thing. As long as their brain is controlled by the lie, in a practical sense, they're totally the enemy because they're enforcing immorality. But if their brain can be free from that lie, the lie was the enemy, because most of them are well-intentioned. They think they're the good guys. Like if you go back in history to all the nasty regimes, most of their enforcers thought they were the good guys.
Right.
And that's both really depressing, but also encouraging. Because if they were all genuinely malicious, it's like, well, we're in a world of completely malicious people. We're doomed. I'm going to run off and hide in the hills.
Right.
But if they're well-intentioned but deceived, you can fix the deceived part. You can't fix sociopathy. You can't make an evil person into a good person. You can make a mistaken person into an enlightened person, or you can help them go through that process. And that's when I suddenly got a ton of hope, because a quarter of a century ago, I too was playing the political game. I wasn't a voluntarist yet. I was thinking, libertarian, we have to push for the Constitution. I was like, I know this isn't going to work. People don't believe in it. They don't think. The complete morons are out there voting, but I'm going to keep trying. And I felt utterly doomed until I came to the realization that the problem is not in government. It never was. It's between the ears of millions and billions of people who think it's legitimate. And when that goes away, the whole thing goes away. And there is no giant, scary Sauron to overthrow. There's just the one little lie to toss into the flames, and there, we're done.
And it's interesting because it's really a description of also the mental thing sort of will show, I think, in reality, sort of how the USSR kind of fell over and, just dismantled. If you sort of pull the thread on the mental sweater of statism, so to speak, you just take one thread and you unravel it. Candles in the Dark is kind of our way of doing that. It's like you can't force freedom. You don't need to tell someone history and that it's all a lie. You just ask them questions, and if does matter what questions you ask, and you ask them the right way and you ask them certain questions, they will all on their own go to answer your questions, and in so doing walk right up to where their contradictions are.
Right.
And statism, which we teach in Candles in the Dark, requires a mental contradiction, because it requires a mental contradiction to believe that you can be morally obligated in certain instances to go against your own moral conscience. So you have to have a contradiction, and all we do is we guide them up to that contradiction. And you can go around asking people questions and be pulling the threads on their sweaters left and right. Once you get good at it, once you know how to have that mindset, you can ask people questions, and in a few questions have them going, wait. And that's the goal. The goal isn't to convert them. The goal isn't to put your beliefs into them. The goal isn't to tell them what you think, to tell them 9/11 was a lie, to tell them about history, to tell them about the truth of the founding fathers. You don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to give them philosophy. Just ask a few questions till they realize something doesn't match in their own head, and you see it on their face, and then you can go on about your day if you want. And that's part of what we do, and it works. It actually is how you can start. It's like you said, it's education, but even less than that. You don't even need to educate people. You can ask people questions and their brain will figure it out,
because they
on their own.
They already have inside them everything they need to escape the lie. And it's interesting you mentioned honesty before, because one of the main things we focus on in Candles in the Dark is to keep the questions specific, literal, and personal, because statists always have to describe what they advocate in these general, vague, weird euphemisms of, I advocate a policy of blah, 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 blah. When you try to get them to be specific about the violence behind every law, they start to get uncomfortable, because they don't want to say, yeah, if you have a plant that the politicians don't approve of, I want men with guns to kick down your door and point machine guns in your face. Like, they don't want to they want to say, well, I think we need a policy, blah, blah, blah. So just getting them to be honest about what they believe is 99% of what Candles in the Dark is about. Because when they have to be on, and we're being like gentle and nice, we're not being argumentative or judgmental, but when they have to be honest and specific about what they believe, they get uncomfortable. Almost every statist gets uncomfortable with his own beliefs, because when they hear it, when it's literal and personal and specific, they start to go, ooh, that doesn't sound good. Is that really what I believe and advocate? And people do it in different ways and at different points. But almost everybody will get to a point where they don't like hearing their own belief system. And that's when they can actually do something about it and process it and free themselves from the lie. You just sort of lead them up to the place they have to be, where they have to make the choice. And that's what Candles in the Dark is about, is gently leading them where they need to be, to see that inside the head is this contradiction. There's the real them and there's the authoritarian indoctrination, and they don't match. And you have to just gently invite them to choose, well, which one is it going to be? Do you own yourself, or are you owned by somebody else? Slavery or freedom? It's binary. Those are the two choices. That's all there is.
I had someone talk to me, and they're like, well, they were talking to me about voting, and they were using an analogy, and I thought this was very interesting, because I was just asking questions, but they brought up the idea of buying slaves as if it was legitimate. They were like, well, if we buy the slaves their freedom, then they could become free. So I was like, well, aren't you legitimizing the fact that you have to buy them then for them to be free? And they couldn't process that at first, you know what I mean? But it took some time. I think that is just an example of one of the contradictions, and perhaps one of the ones back then. If that worked for freedom, then I'm sure all the abolitionists would have said, okay, let's buy all the slaves, but they knew that's not what's going to give them their freedom in actuality. As I like to say, only you can free yourself. When it comes to action, and we were talking about this basically the whole time, essentially, what the action has to be, which takes place within the individual and their mind. Do you think a movement is necessary? I know you've talked about movements before. The reason why I want to ask this question is because it's a little different, and I know that back then a lot of movements sparked a lot of change. Now, of course, it's not limited to one form, but do you think it needs to be like back then where they had meetings in every town and anti-slavery, different associations and newspapers, and everybody had their own local events trying to educate the public. Do you think that would be beneficial for people to maybe look into doing?
It's already doing that.
It can be. To me, the thing that matters is the mentality of humanity overall. And there are a bunch of organizations and projects and stuff that help that along. And there are a bunch of projects that sort of become about themselves and like, well, we're trying to be really super important and we kind of forgot what we were there for. And so there's so many events and organizations and individuals that sort of fall by the wayside. And so having been doing this for a quarter of a century now, since I became a voluntarist, I watch the ideas go along and I see lots of little groups and organizations, and a bunch of them are doing good stuff. And then some of them go off the rails and whatever. So to me, almost all of those are short term, but some of them can be very useful.
They spread the message further. Like, I think the usefulness is in, it's all, we agree, this is all hearts and minds, right? So then the more hearts and minds are obviously gathering and talking about this, the further it's spread. And I sort of think that humans that's what's happening right now. Like, we're doing that organically. That's happening with the internet. There's, at least that we know of, hundreds of thousands of anarchists around the world now, which means, and that I know of, there's at least dozens of intentional communities that are off grid that aren't telling the world they exist, that are probably growing by leaps and bounds. And there's those things happening, like meetups and voluntarist groups that we don't all know about. And I feel like that's just going to grow. But like you said, it's like no one of those things it's like, it's not about getting that going. It's not like about me getting the next conference going. Because if I, Amanda, don't get the next Liberty conference going, by golly, we're not going to kill statism fast enough. It's like, it's inevitable, I think, actually. But it's more of that can help things. Yeah,
the analogy to slavery still works perfectly, if you ask me. How many people know the names of the abolitionists? 1/100%. Does it matter anymore? No, because we all know slavery is not okay. And all the organizations and all the movements and the Underground Railroad, if you said abolitionist, I'm pretty sure less than 1% of the population would know what you were even talking about. Like, they haven't even heard the term, but it doesn't matter, because that particular kind of slavery and injustice, humanity outgrew that and figured out, okay, that's not okay. And what I most look forward to is a day when nobody's heard of my books, nobody's heard of the movement, nobody's seen any of my videos or read any of that, because they don't need to, because they all say, well, duh, of course we own ourselves. Why would we ever appoint a ruler? What's for dinner? Like, and I think we're going to get to that point. And when we're there, I know we're going to get to that point. When we're there, all of the movements, all of the individuals, all of the books, all of that, there'll be a few weirdos like us looking back on history and studying, how did we get here? And for most of the population, it won't matter, because the lie of statism will be dead and gone. And to me, that's what matters. So all the messengers, all the organizations, there's so many that have done a bunch of good. So I'm not downplaying them, but I'm saying the overall drift in humanity's consciousness and awareness and thought process is the thing that matters. And everything else, including me, is just details and trivia and dust in the wind in the end.
Interesting.
But I am so encouraged by how quickly I see a lot of people going from the slave mindset to the free mindset. And if you ask me, that has never happened before in the history of the world. It's gone from, we want to be the slaves of this to we want to be the slaves of that. Like, almost like the American Revolution. Heck with King George. Now we want our own rulers. It's like, and some of them said, we don't want any, please. Like you were talking about, the abolitionists recognized we don't want any form of slavery, but they were this weird fringe bunch of, fringe kooks.
And everybody forgets James Madison and Patrick Henry.
Yeah. The Federalists were like, no, don't worry, it won't be bad. And Patrick Henry was like, this is going to be a disaster. It's going to be way worse than the king. Yeah. And then it immediately was, and nobody remembers that, and it doesn't matter. But I absolutely think that humanity is just as predestined to outgrow the insanity of statism as they were to figure out slavery is not really okay. And now we can look back at that and go, why? I mean, why on earth did we ever have to have a debate about that? Duh.
Right.
Well, it's not going to be that far in the future before all of humanity looks back to right now and says, why on earth did any of them think there was such a thing as a rightful master?
Yeah, I really think there's going to be a lot of people that just go, what were we doing? What was anybody doing? Because people, the reason I have faith in humanity is because the human spirit is towards freedom and truth. Like, yes, you can inject a bunch of stuff into the human baby and you can mess up its brain and you can put weird foods into it and you can make it autistic and stupid in a bunch of ways and you can change it until it's confused. You can do a lot of things to people, but you can't kill their freedom and you can't dumb them down to the point that they don't know that something's wrong when everything around them is so oppressive that they notice they can't find freedom. And so what I think we're doing is the same thing. It's like the humans did with chattel slavery. It's like with chattel slavery, it was like, okay, we can't imagine how the whole world could not be slavery someday, but we're just going to keep pushing. And then before we know it, and we're all going, well, that just happened. That wasn't that long ago. And look where we are. And right now we have people going, I can't imagine a world without government. And I'm going, yeah, well, look where we got. And we got to here without the internet. Now the human family on this little planet rock thing called Earth has the internet. So we're all communicating like lightning fast. So we're leveling up faster than ever before. So whenever people say, well, history is doomed to repeat itself, I say, no, it isn't. Because when something new in history enters history, it's not repeating anymore. And guess what's new? The internet. That's brand freaking new in history. That didn't exist in the other
Good point.
empires that got to cycle through. So now we have a way for all of the humans to communicate.
Yeah, more knowledge. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. So to me, people getting upset that a particular regime is oppressive, there's nothing new and there's nothing encouraging about that. That's been happening for centuries and centuries and centuries. What is encouraging is the number of people who are saying, it isn't just for this regime. It isn't just these regimes. It's the idea of having a ruling class that is the problem. And that has never happened before on the scale that it's happened in the last 10 years in the world, as far as I know. I mean, maybe if you go back 10,000 years to some history I don't know about, maybe it happened back then. But this, for once, isn't just the revolution thing of ruling class falls over, or there's a revolution or something. Now we have another one. Now we have another one. Now we have another. We keep going through it because now we're coming up on a time when a bunch of people figure out we don't need a new one. We don't need to replace the old tyrant with a new tyrant. We need to figure out that the who's on the throne is not the problem. The fact that there's a throne is the problem. Get that throne out of here and then mind your own business. The end. And then that's when actual humanity starts. It's not the end of everything. It's not everything is fixed. That's when we can start acting like human beings, is when we outgrow the lie of slavery.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, I will make sure for everybody who's listening out there to look into the details about your movie. I encourage they look into this. This movie is going to be very powerful for a lot of individuals. And as it is your book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, of course, like I said, is something that I know was going to change the world. I don't have to probably believe it because I can see it in front of my eyes. Talking to over 50 people for this summit, many of them which are also order followers and police, as you talked about before. And I never expected to come across this information, not at all. I was the most obedient. I followed every rule in school. I did not, not comply with anything. But I had a strong moral foundation from having a strong family that might have helped me along the process, I will say. But at the end of the day, those questions that were proposed by you and High Impact Flicks, which was a content creator that originally got me into this, and then Mark Passio as well, it stuck with me. I these contradictions in my head, and I was like, I have to address it. So I think even if the media starts attacking this message because they see it's gaining more traction, I mean, the truth is the truth, and the market of ideas, I think it's going to start to rise to the top, as we talk about with this destiny. I know that a lot of other ideas may enter the sphere. Like a lot of people have a lot of philosophy debates about different forms of anarchism, etc. But I do think the morality is always going to I think take the top. But I would like to get, as a final conclusion question, your thoughts on sort of natural law. And the reason why I want your thoughts on this is because it's an optional tool toward understanding this knowledge. I don't think it's required, but it's something that could help. It helped me because I'm a very organized thinker. I like to have everything in like one format so I can understand it and speak it better. I think it's good for that reason. That being said, I would like your approach because it is more common sense based. I can understand it. I can take it from the individual's point of view. I don't have to tell them morality is objective, it's right and wrong because of natural law. I can understand where they come from and find out their own contradictions in their own head. So I'm not dissing Mark Passio's strategy, but being that I am in his network and I know his knowledge by heart, I do see some problems that can happen when it comes to this mindset of this is the only solution, when there may be other ways of getting to the same knowledge. What do you think about that?
I think I hardly ever use the term natural law,
Yeah.
and it's not because I disagree with it. It's because for almost everybody out there, the term law means the dictates of an authority, which natural law, that's not at all what it means. But I think the trouble in using a term and then having to describe to people that it's the exact opposite of what you think it is. Like we already have to do that with the word anarchy. You don't want to also have to do it with the term natural law. And so to me, it's very valuable. I see two groups, and I'll be a little bit condescending here. There's people who like to think about things and they like to question things, you know, like you noticed things and you looked into it and you wanted to understand things and dig into it. And the natural law stuff is awesome. And all the explanations and all the, you know, there's 8 million treatises on a zillion different issues related to this that are awesome for those people. The sad reality is if only those people wake up, we're still doomed because we're vastly outnumbered by people who don't really like to think. And so my approach, and a lot of people say this as a compliment, so I take it as that, is they like that I dumb it down to a level that any idiot can understand.
Right.
And basically, I feel like we have to do that because the people who don't particularly like to philosophize or question things, or they just want to know what's for dinner, they too are victims of this lie and they too can outgrow it. And so my focus is very simplified. And a lot of people, I think, assume that I'm just sort of dumb because I speak on such a low level. That's because that's what most of the world speaks on. I love the fact that Mark Passio does what he does, and that, you know, there's a lot of other resources that are you have to like concentrate and focus and learn stuff. You have to actually care and want to learn it. And for the people who want to learn that, I think it's awesome that that stuff is out there. Most of the world doesn't want to learn it. And I haven't given up on all the people who a lot of pro-freedom people seem to think are too dumb to understand freedom. There's not anybody too dumb to understand freedom.
No such thing.
There are people bad at logic and they don't like to think, and they're mushy headed. Their reason ability is next to nothing. Even they can be reached. Now, you're not going to have an in-depth, profound philosophical discussion with them. They're going to be, how about them Sixers? That's the extent of their discussion, but they can still be free to, and they should be helped out of the lie too. So I sort of focus on the dumbed down kindergarten version of explaining these things. And the thing is, when people who like to think get the dumbed down version and they go, oh yeah, and they want to get all that other stuff, I think it's awesome that it's there. If they want to dive into 8,000 billion hours of Mark Passio's stuff, like, and treatises by Frederick Bastiat and whatever else, I think that's excellent. So I'm just doing self-ownership 101, which I don't think anybody is too dumb to understand. It does take some self-training and understanding psychology, which is what Candles in the Dark is about. Really good at that, talking to normal people who don't like to question things, to think about things and getting them to do it, but it can be done. So I sort of see that as my role is the 101 level, and other people can do the advanced like explanation of economics and everything else. But to me, it's a numbers game. And we need a bunch of the people who don't like to think to be free.
As an example, like we've had people really who are like, they're like one guy who was MIT professor,
Yeah, not sure
something?
supposed to.
A graduate anyway, but we've had people that are like, they'll tell that he's an example of someone. We've had more than one person be, come to us and say, I'm supposed to be somebody that's good at communication. But when it comes to getting the ideas of freedom out to people, I'm struggling. And then Larkin teaches them the candles in the dark method, and then they go and talk to like 6 of their colleagues, and now they're all on the same page because they like talk to Larkin and they get the method down. But it's not just about the way to do the method. It is really a mindset of communication. When you're lit up about freedom, I feel like when people get excited about freedom, the first thing they do is they go into evangelical Christian mode. They're like, I know how to save the world. I got to get everyone on board. I got to do it right now. And I got to tell everyone. And like, you come at people with that energy. Like, people can feel you when you're like an energy that's new, foreign, and trying to come at them with something. Like, they know when it's like, you're going to tell me I'm wrong or different. And oh my God. So the thing that liberty minded people do when they're excited, not all of us, but we do when we're excited and passionate, is we do the salesman thing on accident. We're not trying to be slimy. We're not trying to be rude, but we're like the excited salesman that's overbearing. And we think that the goal is put everything in my head into your head as fast as I can.
This is really important. I have to tell you all about it.
And it's like, that's not really what we have to do here. And weirder than that, freedom is only freedom if a person mentally finds it and reaches for it on their own. They can't even be like gifted it. I can't be like, this is what freedom is. Say you get it. And then like, that's not how it works. They have to, like, you ask them questions and they go, yeah, okay, I'm not cool with that. Okay. Are you okay with this happening to you? No. Okay. Are you okay if this happens to me then? Oh, you're not okay with that either. Okay. Well, where do you draw your line with this? Are you okay with this happening? And it's like, you can just walk people through questions. And when their brain is affirming what they think out loud, what people don't realize the power in that is they are building who they are right in front of you. You didn't tell them anything. I'm not telling them to be an anarchist. I'm not even telling them what anarchy is. I'm just asking them a question. They're telling me what they think. So their brain hears their mouth say something out loud they didn't have to say till I made them say it by asking a question. And then they have to say the next thing, and then they have to say the next thing. And then we've done this on our second day of Candles in the Dark with statists. Bring them in and ask them the questions in front of the class. And then like halfway into 5 questions, they've built half their morality. They've already said what they believe and what they think. And then you get into the deeper questions. They already know what they just said. So if they say something that's going to contradict what they said before, they're about to be aware because you made them say it. And so what I love about Candles in the Dark is it isn't educating people because it isn't even putting in them what I think. Me doesn't enter the picture. It's the least egotistical thing possible. It is literally all them. It is just, I care enough about the anarchist in you, the freedom lover in you that I know is trapped under that belief, that I'm just going to ask you a few questions until it comes out and starts thinking. And then I'm just going to walk away and leave you with it if you want. And that's kind of what we do. And it works every time. The cool thing is it works because we're not trying to convert. The working isn't, I got you to believe like me. The working is, I asked them a few questions. And once you paused and went, I realized, oh, we got to the goal.
Right.
Like, I can keep asking questions, but my work here is done.
Yeah. And once somebody gets to the point where they're questioning and thinking about it, then they're sort of self-driven. Then they can, look up natural law or whatever they want and delve as deep as they want to delve, because then they're looking for it. Most people aren't looking for this. They're like trying to avoid it at all costs. So Candles in the Dark is the gentle invitation to look at it long enough to make people able to go, whoa, this is kind of, I had that experience. It sounds like you did, where you just, going about your life, you don't know there's a thing. And then you start to see bits and pieces, and then nobody can hold you back from diving in and learning more. It's that first step that matters the most, because after that, you're going to take all the steps on your own anyway. But that first step that you didn't know was there and didn't know you needed to take, like it sounds like you did that. I went through that. She went through, like almost everybody I know went through that, where there's some point at which you're like, wait a minute, I got to sort this out. I have to make sense of it. Once somebody's at that point, cool. Like there's all the resources in the world that they can go look up and dive into. But that first step is everything.
You're right. And learning how to talk to people is sort of like a practice I've learned. You have to because I have met a lot of people who want to jump out with so much information, and it's actually made me want to sit back and be like, is that really the best approach? And then, and I just observe what people do, and I observe and I listen more than I speak. And as a health coach, I kind of learned some of that too. In my health coaching practice, I can relate sometimes health practices to what you're trying to do, therapy, Socratic method and such. I think it's amazing work, and I encourage everybody looks into it because, like you said, I mean, you really simplify it down for people. The Most Dangerous Superstition, the book, and your movie, The Jones Plantation. You also have a website, right? Is it therosechannel.com?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the website just for Candles in the Dark is attendcandles.com.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either get it there, pay once and have it for life, or the Rose Channel is a subscription thing, and people who subscribe there also get Candles in the Dark and a whole bunch of podcasts and a bunch of other stuff.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining me, and I appreciate everybody out there for watching as well. Thank you. If anybody wants to see a lot more speakers like this and a lot of free resources, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
All right. Good stuff. All right, we're done with the first interview for tonight, but we have more to come. In fact, my next one is going to be pretty darn cool. The next one I really like a lot. We talk a lot about everything, and past just the fundamentals, but putting it more into action. And, of course, we have a variety of different topics on pretty much everything you can think of. But this one I really like. So I'm just adding it in right now here. There we go. Okay, I have it set. But anyways, I see there's some new people who entered the chat. So hello, how's it going? What's up? This is my usual little stream setup when I'm not, playing videos or whatever. I just have it like all these weird things on the screen. Some of you guys have probably never seen this before, but I've used it on Twitch several times before. That's why I'm live streaming right now to both Twitch and YouTube. In case you were not here for the first intro part of this whole stream, basically, I have redness on my face because I was experimenting with a Japanese hair care product. But anyways, I had kombucha and I drank it all. So I shared also why I made kombucha, if anybody was interested. Hey, Awaken Your Mind. Keela, welcome back. You're always here for the Twitch streams. It's very nice of you. And then we have others like Frank and Fred Gingras. He's one of the speakers for the event. Welcome. He will go deep into addressing the mental side of it, deeper than a lot of what we've actually seen, in addressing something called shadow work. We have a lot of resources for that as well. Several other speakers. There's always more to talk about and a lot more to address, so don't worry. If you think that it's all just going to be about slavery and defining the basic fundamentals, well, we're going to dive deep into action and looking at all the different surrounding perspectives of it. I could see even in the chat, some of you guys are like, well, what about this? What about that? Like economics and job and what would happen about this? Everything is pretty much mentioned. Everything is addressed. So it's going to be really, really cool. And speaking of that, the next interview is going to be about schooling and education. No, it's not Dana Martin. No, it's not Will Keller. There's other people who are talking about similar things in many different ways and perspectives of looking at it. But this is by somebody who I consider a pioneer, somebody who has several different websites and ways to help people, even if they're in school right now. And so we're going to get into it. What we have is David Rodriguez. Thank you guys for watching. Let's hop right into it. All right.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelat. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here joined by David Rodriguez, and he's got a lot of really great projects and a lot of great works that he's done. I'm finding out that he knows a lot of people that I know too, and he is doing a lot of great work. So we're going to be talking today about how parents can free their children from school enslavement and empower them to live powerfully. So if you want to introduce a little bit about yourself and why this topic is really important to you, please, I'm glad to have you.
Yep. Corey, thanks for having me on the summit here. And I help parents remove their children from the government monopoly compulsory school system through accelerated graduations and homeschool consulting. I find a lot of rewarding satisfaction there because I went through the system, as many of us did, and I felt something really terribly wrong with having to get permission to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, and not being able to study what I wanted. I mean, it's unbelievable that this thing's been going on so long. So after I watched Richard Grove's 5-hour interview with John Taylor Gatto, and I had previously heard about him, but that really solidified what's going on in schools. And one of my mentors asked me, or I asked him about, how do you find your purpose in life? Because I was in some financial service businesses, and these guys are making money, but it was like, I feel like I'm here for something bigger than money. And he said, find an injustice large on the planet and spend your life trying to correct that injustice. And so some of these things, with a few other things, help me realize that I'm here to help end the compulsory school system and contribute to solutions. I realize it's a major business enterprise and critical for the enslavement and the control of the planet. But I am still a child at heart. And I think that's one of the keys to learning. I'm principal of a private school called Valor Academy, where we do those accelerated graduations. Homeschool leader, we do homeschool consulting. And those are really the main practices. I did get into business with John Taylor Gatto and helped him republish his Underground History. And we have volume 1 out and 2 more volumes coming, because I think it's really important to understand where the system came from, where you have to get permission to urinate and defecate. I mean, think about the ridiculousness of that. So that's just a quick background. I love freedom. I love peace. I was raised in a very small town, so I love people, and I have hope in humanity despite what we're seeing out there. And I feel a really great awakening towards freedom and self-ownership that's happening right now. And it's an amazing time to be alive. And so yeah, it's great to be with your audience, and we'll share some of the solutions and some way to empower parents and the next generation so we can really grow freedom on this planet.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're focusing on parents and children, the school system, because it's something that does affect a lot of people today. And a lot of parents feel like, I don't have the time to, help my children to school them myself if I'm doing homeschooling. And they're trying to look for different solutions because they don't always want them in the system, and they find out how bad the system is. I mean, how bad really is the system? Do parents really need to get their kids out of that system? Is it because of all these restrictions? Is it I mean, some people already know it's bad, but what if people don't really know it's bad? Do they think, oh, well, if the kid comes home and I just talk to him a little bit, I can help him. I can guide him through the process. I mean, do you think it's really important they take the kid out, or?
Yes, that's a great point. Yes. So there are circumstances where, families can't do it for whatever reason. They can't remove their child. And so in that case, I suggest you have a very honest, authentic conversation with them about what is happening at 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. What is this? The bell's ringing every 45 minutes. Strangers, are blocking you from going to the bathroom, giving you assignments. And so you can let them know, and this is where mom and dad come in. And this is kind of the first point, is that you got to know that the state school system was designed to create obedient people to the state. So specifically thought patterns, attitudes, habits, and allegiances. Behavior is what it is. So that's what it was designed for. And here we are, 2022, you get 12 years of compulsory schooling where you don't get to choose your curriculum. You don't get to choose where you go. And so, yes, you can still, remedy the situation by talking to your child about, hey, this superficial world, getting permission, like that doesn't exist anywhere else except in prison and state compulsory schools, and let them know, hey, where mom and dad are both working, or a single parent or something like that. So I have a lot of empathy for, parents who can't do it. But as we're looking at the curriculum right now, 2022, I mean, 5 years ago, it was diabolical. In 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it was still bad. But now the state school curriculum is telling a young boy that he can be a girl, and a young girl that she can be a boy. And that is totally false. This is a destruction of their identity. This is attacking the self-evident truth. If I look down and I have a lingam, that means I'm a boy, I'm a man, and opposite for a woman, so they're attacking the actual truth, and truth and justice are directly related. So rather than the schools trying to empower the full potential of your child to achieve their goals, their dreams, their ideals, to make the world a better place, no, they're talking about climate change, which is, a form of communitarianism or communism, as Rosa Corey says, and social justice, right? So they've gotten rid of the self-evident truth, which you own your body, you own your life, and you own your property. And that's all within this beautiful thing that source or creator or nature, evolution gave us, this body. And they've gotten away from that. So the curriculum is very disempowering. And I think as parents understand the history of schooling, and you can look at that interview with John Taylor Gatto, it goes back to Germany or Prussia. And even before that, rulers have always known that if you control the minds of the people, then you don't have to physically put chains on them. They will put chains on themselves. And we saw that with the last 2.5 years of the scamdemic, when these Karens or Darrens come around telling you wear a mask, and you're like, oh, the order or this or that's, like, you don't have any authority to force me to take a medical device on my face. So, and then schools are forcing the mask on the kids, and schools are forcing the jabs, the vaccines on the children. So I think if you don't have a plan to get your child out, I think you might want to start thinking about one. Whether you do it tomorrow, next week, or next year, really take it serious that when you put your child in these schools, they are getting some mental brainwashing, some mind control, and it is very disempowering. And what we want to do is liberate them so that they can actually see the truth that the world is the classroom. Learning is fun. It's exciting. And as you become an educated individual, you know that learning is lifelong. So from birth until death, we're always learning, and even though I'm on the interview side, I'm learning from you. We're learning from each other. We're seeing, what's going on in Pennsylvania and the summit, and you're an author as well. So there's a continual back and forth with educated people versus the state system, which is I'm in charge, you do what I want. Whereas in a, let's say, homeschool environment or a truly open source environment, everyone is learning, everyone's a student, and everyone's a teacher. And so I think that's really important for parents to understand, is that the history of the school shows you what's really going on. And at that point, that should put some fire under your bottom to say, okay, I got to figure out some solutions. And whether you work with me or other people, there's a lot of solutions out there. Go to StartPage or SwissCows or some other search engine out there and type in your question, and you will find really great answers. But hopefully I'll provide some answers with the rest of this conversation as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I was going to say, like, hey, so you're also building alternatives, right? You're not just saying the system is bad. Well, if people don't think, oh, well, maybe it's, that bad, well, they can look at this system and decide for themselves what they want to do, right? And see, well, do they want this mandatory schooling system, or do they want the system that supports the individual and their own learning process? So I kind of want you to share a little bit about these programs you mentioned. You mentioned some before. Where could people find more information about that? And before you get into that, I just want to say that, when you talk about like the history of the schooling system and how corrupt it is, what also comes to mind is a book that is written by a man. He calls himself Etienne de la Bourse. It's French. He took that name from somebody from the 1600s. It's a book called Understanding Our Slavery from the Art of Liberty Foundation. And I think the website is government-scam.com. And it's a book that he wrote, and it goes over the history in detail, talking about the economic system and the schooling system and how, and the techniques that they use in pretty detailed methods. So do you want to share with us your methods then for the alternatives to that school system, and why they're better because they're not mandatory, for example, and where people can learn more about them?
Sure. So maybe 8 years ago, my dream was to start like a physical school with a building. And then as I looked into it, I realized that is very cost prohibitive, and that's why a lot of people didn't do schooling. So I kept searching. One of the courses I took was how to start a school, and they introduced me to a school, a physical school, which has been going on for 100 years in England, completely voluntary. And the name of the school is called Summerhill. And here's how the school works. You show up, they give you a list of optional classes, and they say, check off the classes you want to take this semester. And if you don't want to take any classes, no problem, go play, go have fun. We have 10 acres of land here. There's a bike ramp in the front. There's musical instruments in the barn, and go play. And there's a movie about it from 2008. I recommend parents watch it. It's so emotional because there's so much trust involved with the child that I wish I had that as a youngster as well. And I couldn't believe that this school was going on. Well, that's called a democratic school. And I learned that there's other democratic schools, some been around for like 40 or 50 years in the US, called Sudbury schools. And then I attended some conferences and learned and talked with the people. I interviewed Peter Gray and Sugata Mitra and some of these other great educators, trying to find what is really the truth of education. And if you look at the root word of education, educo, it means to pull from within, to elicit, to pull out. And so this refers to that we're all born geniuses, like Buckminster Fuller said, the great humanitarian scientist. And the challenge is that we get de-geniused, trying to please our teachers and please our parents. Or as Pablo Picasso said, every child's a born artist, but they lose their artistry as they become an adult. And so the philosophy at Valor Academy stands on two concepts. The first one is that the world is the classroom, and class is always in session. This is a very fundamental part of a self-educated individual. It's always happening. Whether you're in a building, you're in nature, you're on a boat, you're in a plane, you're wherever, you're in a hospital. If you are someone looking for knowledge and skills and facts and truths, they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. So that's first one. The second concept is that anything, anybody you can learn from can be a teacher. So when you start your homeschooling journey, or even if you're not, still don't consider yourself to be a teacher and you're going to replicate the school system at home. Okay, that's phase one of homeschooling evolution. It's 10 o'clock, time for math. Oh, 1 o'clock, language arts, right? So you've replicated that system at home. Phase two is to de-school. So when you remove your child from the school system, you want to let them decompress from that superficial environment because they're under stress. They're being forced. They're around total strangers. They don't know anybody. And the rule of thumb is that for every year they're in a compulsory learning environment, you want to give them a month of total freedom. And so what that means is if you have a fifth grader and you take them out of the school and you're not homeschooling, you want to give them 5 months to sleep all day if they want, to play video games all day if they want, to do whatever they want so they can decompress. The analogy is that if you have a bottle of soda, you shake it up, you don't open it and drink it, you open it and let the pressure release. Same thing for our children. You have to let all that pressure release, and then eventually they'll come back down to earth. And as humans, we love to learn, except when we're forced to do it. And then step three is homeschooling itself. And how I define homeschooling is that homeschooling is when a leader creates an atmosphere where personalized learning can occur. And so mom and dad, you're the leader. You brought this young being, child, son or daughter into the world. And so you're the leader. And so you're creating an atmosphere. What type of atmosphere do I suggest? An atmosphere where it's calm and respectful and peaceful, and where mistakes are welcome, and you're not judging them on their results. You're judging them on their efforts, their intentions. Of course, later they will need to perform in life to, make a living and do all these things as adults. But initially, they're just trying to find self-confidence. They're just trying to find that place inside of them where they're courageous, where they're expressive. And that's why in school, we learn to be afraid of public speaking. We learn to be afraid to ask questions because our friends are going to mock us and make fun of us. But in a real educational environment, in the entertainment business, it's called the writing room, or the writer's room. I don't like entertainment because that kind of has a bad connotation with Hollywood, but like I should say in the high performance world, the writer's room, we're trying to make a movie, we're making a story. It's a very safe environment. And that's what you're creating in your house. It's okay to ask questions, even if they're super stupid. It's okay to make mistakes, right? That's how we learn. Sometimes mistakes are the greatest teacher. And then phase 4 of the homeschooling evolution, in my opinion, is 100% self-directed learning. And some people call that unschooling. And that's where now, as a mom and dad, you don't have to create the environment, the atmosphere, because your son or daughter knows that their education and their success is up to them. It is their responsibility. You've done what you could as a mother and father. I believe it's our responsibility to be the champion of unconditional love. That is our main role, and to help build trust in the relationship. Everything else is immaterial or almost less important than just loving your child, loving and loving and loving and trusting and trusting. And eventually, and it took me 20 years to realize my mother's love for me, my father's love, but then eventually you realize somebody loves you no matter what, no matter whether you're high performer, low performer, fat, healthy, sick, poor or rich, it doesn't matter. I am loved. And then that answers some of the questions of like, am I lovable? Am I good enough? And you only have maybe 15, 18 years, 20 years to do that, in your house. And then the thought patterns, the beliefs, the attitudes are already there instilled in your child. So that's the kind of the homeschooling fundamentals I give, for parents. And then the teenage component, as I said, we do accelerated graduations. And so I'm graduating people that are age 14, 15, 16, because they're either bored out of their mind, they're being disrespected. Sometimes they're 17, 18 years old, still having to get permission to go to the bathroom. One of my recent clients, they had to sign like 3 pieces of paper. He's 18, he's a senior in high school, and he thought he could make it through the last year. But, I think we're probably going to graduate him in the next month or 2. Get him out and start going to community college, do some apprenticeships, do some internships. But there's no need to sit in your chair in front of a stranger who you'll probably never see again. Bless your soul. My mother was a public school teacher. I have family members that are teachers, but I haven't heard from any of them, the teachers, since I've graduated. It's a job. God bless them, but they see 100 to 125 students a day, and they barely know your child's name. But you love your child. You are there for your child. You're going to be there forever.
Right.
So you have all the qualifications required to homeschool your child, which we now see. We're not even like being the teacher. I teach my clients that better than a teacher, you're their learning partner, you're their guide, you're their coach, you're a facilitator. So then rather being on opposing sides of the table, you're on the same side of the table, and hey, let's do it together. Because if you went to public school or most private schools, you weren't given the freedom to study what you wanted to study. These devices have changed the planet, and it's only been about 15 years. And so imagine in 5 years, in 10 years, information is overwhelming on the earth, on the internet. So now one of the most important skills is learning to concentrate, learning to focus, not more information, less information. We have to chop up the information that is no longer relevant to find out what is relevant for your child. And one of the questions I give to my clients also is, what do you desire for your child? Well, I want them to be successful. Great. What does that look like? Well, happy, healthy, independent. They can produce, make their own income or livelihood and be an independent adult. Great. That's generally the answer I get across the board from every parent. So if that's your definition of success, or that's what you desire for your child, how are you going to get there? Are you going to get there by giving them to strangers who are enforcing and implementing a curriculum, which is basically denying the truth of gender, or fabricating the climate change, hoax? And it's not to say that the climate is not changing, but what is it really about? In my conclusion, the United Nations is trying to build a global totalitarian state and say it's in the name of saving the planet and saving the children, saving the animals. But in Richard Grove's recent presentation with Foster Gamble, he showed the primary evidence from the 1880s, 1890s, I think, with the Rothschilds, showing that they already were looking for the problem to make a global government, and it was you have to make man his own enemy. So then that's where it's like you and your carbon, and you got to reduce it, and the humans are killing the earth. No, there's a technocratic, hyper wealthy predator class that is attacking humanity, and they want to enslave humanity, and they want to RFID chip everybody. And you can see that evidence with Aaron Russo, his firsthand testimony from Nicholas Rockefeller. That is exactly what they said. They want to chip. So it's a slow incrementalization of this is the problem, here's the solution. And if we go to the end game, say, you know what? I don't want this slavery to continue, which is one reason I love the name of your summit, The End of Slavery. And I have my definition of slavery is being forced to do work against your will while your freedom is restricted. And that is exactly what's happening in schools from age 6 to age 18. Your child's being forced to do schoolwork against their will. And most of the teachers are really good-hearted, well-intentioned people. As I mentioned, I have loving people in my family, but they only have about 5% to change the curriculum. But 95%, they get that from the state or the district. And that's how the schools get their money, is by implementing this curriculum. And of course, Common Core a few years ago, Bill Gates was funding that. And you always want to look where the money's coming from. And it's such a diabolical plan, it's almost hard to believe. But go look at the 1910 book from King Gillette. It's called World Corporation. And he laid out how to have a global totalitarian corporation, which makes the state obsolete and just takes over. So these guys were thinking about it over 100 years ago. And when you have all the money in the world, that's what you do. And so the school enslavement that we're trying to get parents to really take serious that's happening there is the forming of total obedience to the state authorities. That is the end goal of these coercive schools. So what's the solution? Have voluntary learning. I mentioned Sudbury, Summerhill. There's other schools called Agile Learning Centers, Acton Academy's taken off, and a lot of other great schools out there. But it starts with you, mom and dad. It's understanding what's going on in the school system. What are my different options and solutions, and how do I get there? And so this is what we're having this conversation for, so we can really redefine what is success. And we mentioned we want happy, healthy, independent children. But then how about you, mom and dad? What is your definition of success? And I invite you to consider modeling those habits and attitudes and behaviors that you want to see. And one of the best ways to do this is to have your own learning project that you're participating in. Even if you're 25 or 35 or 45 or 50 or more, your child, whether they're 5 or 10 years old, they're looking at you and they're saying, oh, wow, mom, what are you doing? Oh, I'm learning how to knit. I'm learning how to paint, or we're doing gardening today, or we're learning how to can food. And so when it's voluntary, the kids actually want to help. And I've seen it happen many times with the child's, they want to help wash the dishes. They want to help do the laundry. They want to help. And so you might not see that as educational, but if you look into your child's eyes and see the genius that is there, you see the infinite potential that exists in that beautiful soul, then they will see it later eventually. And then they will say, you know what? My mom believed in me. My dad believed in me. My grandparents, whoever believed in them. And so I'm going to believe in me too. And then that's when you start producing. That's when you start creating. You detach from the results that you are creating, and you become liberated, because now you're not trying to get permission from Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Smith. You're not trying to get a diploma from some state school. You are living, you are being, you are doing stuff that makes you happy, whether you make $1 million or $10, it doesn't matter. And eventually, as you practice these skills, which is why I'm so grateful to be on this summit, because you're creating media. And this is what's so powerful, because for thousands of years, the rulers created the newspapers, the pamphlets, the printing press, and these types of, let's say the Bible even, you weren't allowed to read the Bible unless you're a priest class. And so the Gutenberg press, in the 1500s got the information out, and all of a sudden people are reading the Bible and they say, we don't got to pay indulgences for our sins. We're connected to Jesus Christ. Every man's a priest unto himself. And with the internet revelation, it's like, oh my gosh, we don't need the mainstream media. We don't need the mainstream musicians. We'll just make it ourselves. So there's bifurcation of humanity, and your child, mom and dad, are being called to be a leader in whatever field that they are in. And as you allow them to love what they're learning, to enjoy what they're doing, they will continue to do it. And this is that persistence. This is that self-discipline where they start to say, wow, I'm an important person. And you say, yes, you are. You are very important, versus being a cog in the wheel in this state school system, trying to trade your life for a piece of paper. And nobody cares about the piece of paper, in my experience. The high school diploma, the college degree, I have a business degree. No one's ever asked to see it. And even people with PhDs, the PhD came from Prussia itself, trying to create the class system like they had over in England, and to make different strata of people, the poor, the middle class, and above. It's like we're all equal. And this is what we're starting to realize, and this is what terrifies these predator psychopaths, is that we're stepping into our power now. And I believe humanity will win. I think we're coming through the kind of the birthing pains of a new consciousness, of a new humanity. But I think the game might be up for these guys, and I think they might know it. So they're going to try to keep doing really heinous things. But humanity is really starting to awaken. And so it's our children that I see the hope in. I'm the young child, as I still see myself. So these are some of the things for parents to kind of, get a handle on and watch it over again, so you can see some of these concepts. But a lot of these I stole from John Gatto. I stole from some of my other mentors, Charlie Jones, or Brian Tracy, or Art Williams. A lot of great people who have given me some of this information. Now I want to give it to them, because it is up to them, and it's the next generation that's going to liberate us. And it is through the schools where a lot of this mind control is happening. Physical abuse is happening, sexual abuse. And it's just unacceptable at this point. And we get what we tolerate in life. We get what we allow in life. So if you allow your child in these types of situations, there's nobody to blame except the man in the mirror. Although we have some compassion for each other, because we came from the system and we've been controlled ourselves. The word government, gubernare mente, literally means control of the mind. And I love that book by Etienne de la Boétie, Squared, Understanding Our Slavery, or the new title is Government, the Biggest Scam in History, Exposed. And he shows the patterns of these totalitarian states in Russia and Germany, and how they use the schools. They pledge allegiance to the flag. And before I defecate on that practice, I know there's good people in the military, and those good people in government offices and jobs who believe in liberty and justice for all. And I think many of them are unaware that these predators use symbols as a way to create habit reactions. And so if you ever read the Pledge of Allegiance, and in that book is great, it shows, I think it was created in the 1940s from a communist, but you have to read that book to verify that for yourself. But instead of pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, why not pledge allegiance to honesty, to humility, to truth, to freedom, to love, to compassion, to family, to values, to forgiveness and mercy? Those would be worthy allegiances, in my opinion, but you're never going to see that, because that whole system is dependent upon your child not knowing any of these other options existed. And this is the conversation I had with a family member the other day about morality, because as you start to realize, okay, there's government law, codes, statutes, and then there's morality. And I think this is why Martin Luther King and Gandhi are such champions in their fields, is that I think MLK said, it's a man's duty to disobey an unjust law. I think Thomas Aquinas said, it's an unjust law is no law at all. Something to the effect that the government and the politicians can do stuff, but if it's morally wrong, then you have to disobey it. And so this is why people say, well, you know, the mask or the vaccine or whatever, anything, getting a permit to change your own roof or getting a permit to grow a garden in your front yard or collect rainwater. These are absolutely totalitarian measures. And we got to have these conversations with our children. And maybe you don't have to be as, you know, direct as I'm speaking with you, Mom and Dad, but I sure wish someone told me the truth when I was a young guy, because I was ready for it. You know, age 12, 13, 14, I realized something was wrong. And it was. They were forcing this stuff on me. And now we're so many years later that I feel really a lot of suffering is happening in these schools. And it's up to the parents to do something about it. The uncles, the aunts, the grandfathers can't do it. It's mom and dad, and you can do it. And I think homeschooling has doubled or tripled in some areas in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think it's going to continue to skyrocket. So it's very exciting time. And I think, you know, I'll share, you know, give you some time here because I'm going off.
No,
This is very
it's
exciting.
great.
There's a lot of different things to talk about.
This is great. No, I like this because I do see a common theme among what you're talking about. You know, we need to look at the root cause to what's going on. And you're right. There's a lot of beautiful people, I mean, such as yourself, who are sharing a lot of this great information with people saying, hey, here's alternatives to the system. And they're not forcing it by the gun or violence, saying, you need to follow what I'm saying. My solution's the only way. No,
That's
they're
right.
saying here are solutions that are perhaps better. And as you will see through our practice, through walking the talk, we are showing it is better. You know, and you have that direct experience, which I think is fantastic. And when you talk about, you know, the teachers and the schools and how they're kind of, you know, pinned down by the government in these systems that are basically built for compliance and for allegiance to the state, we can look at medicine. We can look at policing. And what do we see? The same thing. Doctors can't administer certain medicine because the state gets involved. Police, they have to follow every order these politicians tell them to do. The Army, same thing. And I interview a lot of veterans, people who have to deal with a lot of trauma because they're sent overseas to war to fight some people they barely know, right? So there seems to be a reoccurring theme in humanity, especially for thousands of years, and slavery existed for thousands of years, where morality seems to be ignored or excused in the case of authority. So I think morality is important. And you said, you know, humanity's going through this birthing process and through these pains, I think we can emerge, like you said, out of this problem. But if we do focus on that root cause and realize this common chain of events that's been happening for all this time, all this thing that keeps bothering humanity and bringing us into democide, the top cause of unnatural death, and keeps destroying our human race, right? All of us, doesn't matter what culture, what country you're from, we all keep rising and falling because we have these systems and this undying belief in this authority, which we may call statism, you know? So that I see as the root cause. And it's evident when I talk to a lot of people, and I don't intend to make that my agenda. It happens when we start looking deep as to why is the world acting the way it is? Why are people going crazy? They don't know, you know, they're confused. They're in fear because if they don't comply, they're going to be jailed. They're going to be thrown into a cage. I mean, I do think coaching is important. Like you said, we have to seek out the individual because the individual knows, right? Like you said, the child knows. They just need the questions. They need the guidance to get there. So I thank you very much for sharing that. And I think there is connections to be made worth mentioning. Do you, so I think people can look up those resources you mentioned, right? Those particular schools that you mentioned, could they look them up online, or are there certain websites they can go to?
Yeah, absolutely. I started an expo maybe 7 years ago called the Education Options Expo, because in California, they were doing the forced vaccine at kindergartner and 7th grade. So that's when I started to really see it's freedom time and it's truth time and it's time to rise. And so we did the Education Options Expo. Brandy Vaughn told me directly to my face in 2015 that they had a pipeline of 300 vaccines that they wanted to give to people. And so that was, 7 years ago. And I said, oh my Lord. So most of the speeches I think are on the Education Options TV YouTube channel. And you can see where some of those different options that exist. Watch that Summerhill movie as well. There's stuff on Acton Academy. And again, just redefining what education is and schooling. And so my definition of an education is what you do to yourself to create a good life. And so this is the bigger question is, what is a good life? Exactly. What is a good life, Mom and Dad? This is what we want to discuss, because now this goes to the moral question and the question of what is morality itself, and what is a moral wrong and a moral right. And I think it all hinges upon the truth of self-ownership. And I did a speech recently, and I'm working on a little pamphlet now called Intergenerational Freedom. And my definition of intergenerational freedom is the transfer of the knowledge of the truth of self-ownership and non-aggression, because those concepts were so liberating to me when I first discovered them through Murray Rothbard in his great book, For New Liberty, which was written in 1971. And here he is talking about how a voluntary world would exist without the state, because, Ron Paul's one of the main guys who kind of woke me up. And I said, okay, well, seems like the system's corrupted. And somehow I came across that audiobook and started listening to it, and said, what about the police? Yeah, well, what about the police? Well, who would pay them? How would it work? Well, in Detroit, Michigan, there's a gentleman named Dale Brown, and he has an organization called Threat Management Center. It's been going on for over 20 years, maybe 25 years now, completely voluntary. And he has clients that pay him $10 a month, and they patrol the neighborhood. And if there's ever any trouble, they call him up and he's there within 5 minutes. Unlike Detroit police, that has a monopoly on services and taxes, and you call the Detroit police and they don't show up for hours if they do at all. So that was my main concern about police. And then Rothbard covers national security. He covers intellectual property, all these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So there are solutions, but they're not going to fall on your lap necessarily.
Right.
But creating these types of media is one of the main solutions, I think. And that's why it takes time. We didn't just get here in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. We've been at this thing for at least 200 years in this country, and the Federal Reserve's, over 100 years. So it's intergenerational organized crime, as Howard Lichtman taught me. And so I tried to Aikido that with intergenerational freedom. We got to transfer this knowledge. And this is what we did in Santa Cruz, California. We were out there doing civil disobedience on the beaches because the corona was so smart. It would attack people from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're like, this is not about corona. This is about obedience and slavery. So we got together with our friends. We got the bullhorn, and I went out there. We said, we now declare the beach open. And 12 of us walked on the beach. And the next week there was 20 people, and the next week was 30 and 40. And after 50, 60 people, the county health officer came on television, and I have the video on my YouTube channel, Freedom Lovers TV. And she says, we were hoping to keep the beaches closed, but the people are not willing to be governed anymore, so we have to open up the beaches. She literally said that. Go check that out. So, and then we realized we were sharing people about the scamdemic and the knowledge. Some people are in hypnosis. They're in slave mentality. That's not about information. It's about vibration. And so we started doing free hugs out there. So we gave free hugs for like 50 weeks in a row, and it was very positive, because we're not saying it's a scamdemic or a virus or not. What we're saying is we send you peace and love. That's it. We send you agape love. That is all we're out here giving free hugs. That's all we're doing. And we might start that again up here where I'm at now. But the point was that some people would actually come up to us and like berate us for giving free hugs on a voluntary basis in a public area. And I'm looking at these people. And it took me a while, and I was like, what is going on inside of them? They have so much terror. They have so much fear. They have so much belief in the mainstream media, so much belief in the government officials, that some stranger giving hugs on a voluntary basis in public, they have to come up. And one lady, God bless her, she says, it's really dangerous what you're doing out here. And I said, okay. I said, are you really afraid of a virus, ma'am? She's like, I'm very afraid of a virus. I said, ma'am, maybe you should stay home, because, one day we're all going to die. I'm not going to live in fear. Today could be my last day. I want to live in joy. I want to live in love. I want to live in peace. And I send you peace and love. Would you like a free hug? No? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Have a great day. But anyways, these types of conversations were happening. And so your summit is so on point. I can't wait to read your book about slavery, because this is what it is. And they're very tough words, but I think Confucius had it right when he said, the beginning of wisdom is to call a thing by its name. And if your child is doing schoolwork against their will, against your permission, and the only reason you're doing it is because you're afraid of a truancy officer coming and knocking on your door, then that is slavery. And if at least it is a day prison, because if they can't leave from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., or you have to get their permission to take them on a vacation to go see grandma and grandpa or their uncle, or, you know, go see the ocean or the mountains, it's a prison. And so I think some of the work I do is to help liberate the children, to help set the captives free. But mom and dad, you hold the keys to the prison door. And so that's why you want to have these conversations. John Gatto helped validate my feelings. And so part of my conversations with parents is to say, you know, you don't have to participate in the system. In fact, when you drive your child to the school and drop them off and tell them to obey the teacher, you are participating by proxy in slavery. And I apologize if that's too direct, but this is what is going on. And if you don't know it by now, watch another documentary called What is a Woman by Matt Walsh, where he goes to interviews pediatric doctors and professors and asks them, what is a woman? And they can't define a woman. Even as the Supreme Court justice, she wouldn't define a woman because she's not a biologist. So they're attacking truth. Truth is directly related to justice, because if you're ever in a court of law, the point of the jury is to find the truth. Was it initiated by this person? Did they coerce somebody? Was it an accident? Was it a mistake? Was it, you know, voluntary or accidental or coercive? But to attack truth is to attack justice. And your child is sitting in these classrooms and they're attacking the truth. They are brainwashing your child. And yeah, you might be able to spend a few minutes with them a day, but from age 6 to age 18, your child spends more time with total strangers hired by the state, funded by taxation, which is robbery. And now their intergenerational plan to build a totalitarian state through the United Nations is coming up into fruition through World Economic Forum. And who's the right-hand man of Klaus Schwab, who's saying, free will is over. Humans are not programmable. He's openly telling you they're going to chip your children and remove their free will. And if you have no free will, you have no freedom. So I'm very hopeful that humanity will get out of this, but it's really up to mom and dad. And I have to share some good news here. I'll give it back to you. In Northern California, right? A lot of people have, you know, lost hope in California, but there's a county named Shasta County. This county, October 2021, 45% of students and teachers walked out of school to show they're not going to participate in the forced COVID jab. Well, what happened? 25 county superintendents, school superintendents, wrote a letter to the governor and the health officer and Senator Richard Pan, the vaccine Nazi out here, and said, hey, if you guys force this jab on California, we might lose up to 70 or 80% of our enrollment, because these people up here have already done a walkout with 45% of people walking out. So if we lose that enrollment, we're going to lose state funding. The districts will be fractured. And so as a result, a few months later, Senator Pan scrapped the whole forced COVID jab for the state of California. That clip was produced by Del Bigtree. And I also put that on my Education Options TV channel as well. It's only 3 minutes long. I watched it. I said, oh my gosh, because you can write your emails. You can make your phone calls. Those also make a slight difference. But when you remove your child from their system, they go into absolute terror and fear, and they back down because they know that so many parents see what they're doing to their children, and they're not going to play around. They're not going to try to run for school board and change the curriculum. We're just going to take our children out of your system. Bye-bye. And I think this is what the solution is. Exit and build, the term with Derek Bros and John Bush. Exit their system and build the world you want to see. I like leave their system and create the world you want to live in. Depart and produce, escape and make, whatever it is. As a child, if we're playing basketball with somebody and they're not not being fun, we take our ball, we go to a different court, and we play somewhere else. And I think this is a real solution, is to not try to change the rules of their game and their totalitarianism, but to leave and go start somewhere new. And that's what's happening. There's a lot of people who are starting their own health clinics, start their own schools, start their own grocery stores up in Penn Valley. Mike and Vanessa Cullum, so much respect for them, that we're just going to start our own stuff, our own farms, our own food, independent water, independent energy. Even I've seen a lot of engines running on water on the internet lately, and maybe that's a home generator, maybe that's a car, whatever it is. There's a lot of solutions out there, but it starts with ourselves, mom and dad, changing our mind of what are we seeking, what are we finding for solutions, and understanding that government itself is illegitimate. And I learned this by Lysander Spooner in his great essay from 1871, The Constitution of No Authority, where he proved from a legal perspective that you're not bound to a contract you didn't sign, and nobody can represent you that you didn't appoint to them directly. And I was, oh my God. So we've been lied to, and what's happening is that statism is falling apart. Just like the monarchy fell apart, you know, the divine right of kings, I can rule over you because God made me king. And then Magna Carta, I recommend you read that document or listen to the audiobook in 1200. And the barons were going to decapitate this king unless he backed off. And okay, now we have representative government. And so now we went from the monarchy to the constitutional republic. And I believe this next birth is individual self-ownership. It is so self-evident and clear to anybody with an open mind and open ears that you own your body, you own the product of your labor, and anybody who tries to take that from you is a violent or ignorant individual, and humanity is not going to put up with it. We love freedom, we love peace, we love love itself, we love the children, we love the men and the women and the grandparents and the elderly and the trees and the flowers. We love this life. It's amazing to be a human and to address this great thing called life itself, the mystery of how we got here and where we're going and what we're doing here. It is beautiful. And these predator psychopaths are going for the jugular of humanity. And some people are going to take the chip and they are going to go down. We wish those people well. We don't wish harm on anybody. You're given free will. And if you want to, trade your freedom for security, then you're welcome to do that. But the facts and history has shown that the people who have done that have either gotten murdered or received a lot of pain. And it's so open now that people are making great films. Plandemic 3, I just saw the trailer for that. They're exposing what's going on. Very courageous men and women, and that's what it's going to take. The most important virtue, seems to me, is courage, because that guarantees all other virtues of beauty and goodness and love and family. And without it, we're really screwed. So, when we were speaking out in Santa Cruz for a few years, people really appreciate what we're doing down there. We had a group, and we still have the Facebook group, Santa Cruz Voluntarists. And they said, man, we appreciate what you're doing out there, speaking courage. And I said, well, I actually am more afraid of staying silent at this point. So for me, speaking out was kind of the right thing to do, the only thing to do, because staying silent, trying to be a closet freedom lover, just wasn't working. And once I saw what's really going on, the media is controlled. It's like, okay, well, it's up to me, the man in the mirror, and I'm gonna do what I can. And so I was a right to travel activist as well for a few years. I learned about the driver's license being a fraud. I'm not a commercial driver. I'm not transporting persons or property for commerce for a fee. This is a private traveler in my private conveyance, in my private car. This is not a vehicle, the Department of Motor Vehicles. And so I felt so free doing that. And then I became targeted because I was doing right to travel. I had private plates on my car. And then I was also a public activist out there on the beaches in a super status lefty county. And so that, those two combos put an X over me. And so they just started throwing all these charges at me with my court case. Some details are at freedavid.org, and hoping to do a civil case here shortly. But it really comes down to understanding that these truths of self-ownership are liberating and exciting, and they are the future. And where we are in history is very young. The Declaration of Independence, I think, was a great document for the most part, and it declared that we have unalienable rights from the Creator. Whereas if you read the United Nations 30 Sustainable Declaration of Human Rights. It says you have the rights which the government gives you effectively. So read that. You look at the Bill of Rights, you look at the Declaration of Human Rights, you see which one is more pro-human and pro-freedom. And then the Declaration of Independence is, at some point, we have a right to alter or abolish the government. And I think there's a great phrase which said that, I think it was Jeff Berwick who said that he dreams of a world where there's 7 billion governments, and effectively this body is my kingdom. And I would just say, I dream of the world where there's 7 billion kings and queens. I believe you are the king of yourself. I'm the king of myself. The queens, we are royalty. We're all equal. No one has the right to force us or coerce us into doing anything. And as more people talk about it, then we're all just going to not comply. And I think I saw someone from Canada doing something, united comply or united non-compliance, something like that. And I think that's true. I think that's true, because what we did on the beach, which was they closed the beaches, but they don't own the beaches. So we would have bonfires on the beach, and we would have something called voluntary solutions bonfires. And it's illegal to be on the beach past 10 p.m., even though they're shutting down the restaurants, the churches, the businesses. There's literally no place to gather. And so the rangers would come up on the beach and they say, okay, guys, you can't have a fire, you can't have alcohol, can't have glass. And we would just calmly live stream and record them and say, is this your beach? Do you own this beach? Where do you get the authority to kick us off the beach? And, you know, most officers and rangers never been confronted with that. And so we stay calm. We understand they're under status slavery themselves. They actually believe that they have rights on the beach. But we would say, sir, with all due respect, this beach was here long before your organization was even created. So I don't know what type of authority you're bringing over on here. And so, again, we kept doing that week in and week out. We would have live bands and people coming together. And it was a glimpse of the future, in my opinion. My belief at this point is if you have 8 or 12 people who know they own their body, that government is illegitimate, and you guys unite around a common vision or mission, you cannot be stopped, because they're going after easy targets. And that's why they try to isolate people and make you feel alone and make you feel like a mouse. But in reality, we are mountain lions. We are powerful. We are eagles. We are very strong. And when we come together with a common purpose, which seems to be freedom of choice, and when I introduce people to the idea of voluntarism, which many people haven't heard of, I say, here's the agreement. I promise not to force you to do anything if you promise not to force me to do anything. Can we agree on that? Yes, we believe in voluntary relationships. Yes, congratulations, you're now voluntarious. Okay, awesome, because it's a win-win. It's good for everybody. So I wish someone had taught me that as a child. I would have got it. And probably 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds are getting it. I got this great story, and I'll give it back. One of my friends, she has a 5-year-old son in this story, and she taught him about self-ownership. So anytime she goes to pick him up, she says, hey, can mommy pick you up? Yay, mommy, pick me up. Well, they go to a family reunion, and these adults, mostly status, I would assume, are just unaware. Oh, hey, little Johnny. And he goes to pick up little Johnny, and Johnny slams his elbow down and says, hey, you need my consent to pick me up. And the uncle or the family goes, oh, sorry. And he says, oh, well, can I pick you up? He says, no, thank you. And he runs off, and does his little thing. So it's like, how powerful is that 5-year-old? More powerful than, grown men and women, to know that your consent is required to touch or to pick me up or to do anything with that. So this is, I think, where it's going, is parents who understand these principles and are simplifying it, because, as I think Bill Mollison said, the problems we face are very complex, but the solutions are embarrassingly simple. And so the first one is, who owns your body? And these are the questions that we would pose. We were doing activism, and as we're continually talking with people and helping them liberate themselves from their own mental enslavement, that's one of the first questions I ask is, who owns your body?
Yeah. And you just said it, mental enslavement. In my book, I identify mental slavery is the root cause to physical slavery. It's what inevitably leads to physical slavery. And for me, how I got out of this mess of statism for myself was asking questions. And so now I use the same strategy with the people that, I talk to. I just ask them questions and they could decide for themselves. We're not imposing our will. We're not saying you have to do this or that, but there are people who are, and we simply don't want them to drag us into their net. So let's say, yeah, there are some people who say, yeah, you know what? I want that security. I want this peace and security by the government and by these people and these gang of people who claim to represent me and have this authority that, they somehow proclaim to have. Let's say they want that, so long as they don't push us into their net and bring us with them. It's a voluntary relationship, but that is voluntarism, right? Is understanding what is a voluntary relationship. You want to be with somebody, you want to hire somebody to protect your property, then you can do that. But if you don't, well, then don't. If you don't want to pay for some sort of tax because somebody says, well, you have to pay this for the greater good and the common good, making some sort of justification, of this, means for an ends morality, well, if you want to live under that, I mean, you get the choice. In reality, you get to choose. But if you are enslaved, you don't get to choose. You don't have that ability to choose what you want to do with your own property. So really very, very powerful stuff that you shared with us. You shared with us so many great resources already for the audience, and we're at already about the hour mark. So if you want to share a bit more about where people can find a lot more of your works and a lot of the links, and you already mentioned some websites that you're involved with, do you want to give people like where they can find maybe all your links or where they can find most of your content?
Sure. Yeah, you go to davidjamesrodriguez.com. I'll have the link tree there, and the valoracademy.com will be up and talking about accelerated graduations, as well as homeschoolleader.com. You can get on the email list, and we'll be launching that as well, having bi-weekly training calls for parents about homeschooling, because as you can see, Corey's done a lot of work and research, and so have I on myself and my thinking and beliefs. So you're also going to have to do that as well, mom and dad. So we'll have these trainings up and these calls, because it's little by little, inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's hard. So don't think you have to swallow this elephant of self-education, homeschooling, accelerated graduation in one conversation. I know it's taken me a long time to self-reflect, contemplate, ask myself questions, as you have, Corey, and really get honest with myself and say, what is going on, and why is my family this way? Why is society this way? Why are seemingly good people doing this to peaceful, innocent individuals? What's going on here? And, that's how you eat an elephant, is one bite at a time. So yeah, you can go to those websites. There's some Telegram groups by those names as well. And then I think what's exciting also for the coming future is the concept of voluntary villages. And this is where you have your family, and now the question that I get is, well, where can I find other freedom families, right? And so whether people get together on 100 acres or 500 acres and build a little physical village together, or in the same city and have kind of your homestead and my homestead, I think independent water, independent food, and energy is one of the real solutions as well. And I appreciate what the Free State Project is doing out there in New Hampshire. They have some really cool stuff going on. There's solutions that are starting to blossom in ways that we couldn't imagine. And I'm just grateful to be where I am, to have the loving family that I have and support around me, and where we are in history. This is what an opportunity to be here now, to have this technology and to connect with people like you, Corey, and your audience. I have a lot of respect for moms and dads who are reevaluating their beliefs, because the easiest thing to do is to put your head in the sand, pretend like everything's okay and the government's going to take care of us. And it's really hard to pull your head out of the sand, look what's going on, take a step, join new communities, read new books, and challenge your deepest beliefs, your deepest assumptions. And normally when you do that, you become more free, you become liberated, you become more happy and more joyful. And some of the best people on the earth have admitted their ignorance. And I have to quote them. It was Voltaire, it was Einstein, and it was Socrates. And they all had one version of, well, Socrates said, I know one thing, and that's I know nothing. And I think Einstein said every genius has to admit he or she knows nothing. And then Voltaire said after reading and acquiring all these things, I realize I don't know anything. So if these great people are able to say that, then I can say that. And I invite you to consider saying that, because then we put ourselves down and we can come and treat life as amazing adventure, an amazing journey, and things to learn and discover. And so we keep learning until the end of our days, and then hopefully we can pass the torch. And I think that's what this is all about, is making the world a better place, having some effect on intergenerational freedom to help build a voluntary world, one relationship at a time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you for coming on here and sharing everything about what you're up to and all these great projects. I'm glad to also get involved and meet you. I mean, there's so many great things happening. You're right. And if people want to get involved, they absolutely can. So I encourage, if they want, they can even reach out to myself, and I can hopefully maybe guide them in the right direction if they want certain resources. I made, videos recently going over tons of resources, and just do a little bit of research and it goes a long way. I've met people I never thought I'd meet before, ran into ideas I never thought I'd run into before, but it's powerful once you actually sit down with it, like you said, contemplate it, and then put into action. Put a little seed in the garden, and all of a sudden it starts growing. You're like, wow, I can actually grow food. It's just for example. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing this. And I have one final question, I guess, maybe to wrap this up, because, we are talking about independent creators. Do you think their independent media needs to do more than what they're doing right now? A lot of independent media might just be covering news content. They might just be covering what's going on in the current day. Do you think there are actions that they can take to cause and spark up this activism that we want to see, rather than produce just news content?
Great question, Corey. And I would say yes. I think one of the revelations I had, which kind of helped me step more into my power, was rather than me reporting on the news, I'd rather make the news. And this is not to say like be on TV. This is to say, go do something which is worthy of other people telling other people about. And then as independent media producers, I think it's really helpful when they put focus on some solutions out there that are inspiring and hopeful for other people, because anybody can focus on the problem, and most people do, but it takes a champion, a visionary, a leader to focus on solutions. And if we don't have solutions, we get together and say, hey guys, what are we gonna do? And this is what we did in Santa Cruz. Once we saw, like, this is, I think, a month into the scamdemic, actually Howard was there at the meeting. Me and him co-created this meeting, and we said, hey, let's call up our friends, because I had been in the area for a while. I had some networked freedom lovers there, and we got together and we started this, I think it was, I can't remember, it was Freedom Friday, something like that. But it was like, what are we gonna do? Most of them, God bless them, were statists at that point. Howard had his book, and me and Howard met at Acapulco. So we knew what time it was. We knew this is a real solution, calling out the illegitimacy of government. And we respect all those people, but some of them are still holding on to statism. But the point is, you get together and you say, we're all concerned. I know you guys are all freedom and you're all conscious, but we don't know what to do. We're trying to get together to have this conversation of the solutions and brainstorm. And I think that's what it is. So doing things that are newsworthy, but even reporting on things is very helpful. This is not to denigrate anybody who's saying, here's the problem, they secretly passed this bill or whatever. But ultimately, I think the root solution is to call out the illegitimacy of authority, that nobody has authority over you, your body, your life, your property, unless you consent, and begin talking about that openly. I realize if you're in an urban area, you might be outnumbered by super statists, but more rural places seem to have more freedom-minded people. But again, even in urban areas, you can find freedom people and get together. And I think there's a concept called freedom cells, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But the point is just to get together and say, hey guys, we see this lockdown is coming. We see maybe a shutdown, a food supply shortage, something like this, and say, we got it. We got the problems. Now, what are the solutions? It seems to me that growing our own food is a solution. And so I'll be working on some of these things also with, I think, Food Forest Abundance, Jim Gale. I have positive news. This is the first time this spring and summer I've planted anything really. And I grew some eggplant, I grew some tomatoes. I'm working on some watermelons and these basic things. But Jack Spurko said at Float Fest, he said, you don't have to like design a whole 3-acre farm. He said, step out the back door of your house, find the first piece of soil, and plant something right there and see what happens. That's all you got to do. So again, it's like the school mind that I have is you got to have all these things. It's like, no, you take the seed, you plant it, and now you're a farmer. So I got some eggplant now, and we tried some eggplant, which was really cool. But that joy of knowing that you planted that and that came out is so exciting. And as more people do this, all these mega food corporations are going to have less business, and it's a big problem. Self-sustainability, self-independence, self-reliance is a big problem for them. It's a great joy for us, and I think it's a wonderful thing. Yes, exactly. We're part of nature. Yeah, we're connected to nature and water and food and independence. So yeah, those are some of the ideas here, and we're just continuing to create make media. I think, no matter what platforms are out there, make media, contribute, add, and like yourself, very professional and very joyful to talk with you. But then your strength develops, your skills develop, and pretty soon, you see yourself as an equal to the top people out there in the world, because we all are equal. It's the school that pushed us down, the media, the celebrity worship, all this, baloney, and we just got to keep making it. So yeah, it's a long haul, but we're here for something magical and important, and we're just going to keep chopping away, and little by little, we're going to see us create a really beautiful world that's based on consent and the truth of self-ownership and non-aggression.
Yes. And abolish slavery once and for all in all its forms.
Yes.
I absolutely agree. It's funny, this says in the Declaration of Independence, alter or abolish. Kind of funny to me, but because I use the word abolitionism, I call myself an abolitionist instead of a voluntarist. Nice. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Yeah. But I appreciate, I also say life is a practice, and you got to practice. And if people want to see a lot more of your works, I encourage they do. I saw that you have all your links on davidjamesrodriguez.com, right? So it links them to your link tree, which has a bunch of links. I encourage people to check that out and see all the great stuff that you're up to. And if anybody wants to see a lot more speakers like this, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
All right.
The image of
cool. Yeah. Well, this one interview is over, Eddard, and welcome, by the way. So I am live here, even though I'm playing some interviews. Here, I'll go on camera, show you. Here we go. Oh, blurry. Oh, geez. Okay. Got cream on my face still. But yeah, it was a video that I recorded. I did an interview. I did many interviews, actually. But I used to live stream a lot on Twitch, so it's nice to see a fellow Twitch viewer, Not a lot of Twitch people out there, especially compared to YouTube. YouTube has, basically it's an ocean compared to Twitch. It's like a small little droplet. Yeah. Yeah, I got cream on my face because I got an allergic reaction to a shampoo that I was using before, but gotta say it every time I take a break. But yeah, there's so far we went through Larkin Rose, which is somebody that I interviewed, very fortunate to do so, and then I interviewed David Rodriguez. That was David Rodriguez, who you were watching there at the end. And basically, he goes over a lot about homeschooling and what parents can do during this time, and so many great resources. One of my favorites, very energetic. I love the guy. But there's a lot more to come, and I will say that those are the interviews for today. There's two that I just showed on stream. We've been live for about 3 hours now. And there's one other interview. If you guys are interested, sign up for the summit. You'll see the other interview is on 9/11. So if you are somebody who likes history and somebody who maybe was affected by that event or wants to learn a little bit about it, it shows as an example as to why slavery might be occurring and how we enslave ourselves ultimately. And of course, this is a perspective, Eddard, if you're new to this, that, takes some time to understand, but it's rather simple, How is slavery connected to 9/11? Well, I don't know. Maybe it has to do with people intentionally lying to others and getting people to do certain things against their will, and people order following, doing things that they wouldn't do on their own. There could be many different cases of scenario where laws are passed that otherwise wouldn't have been passed, right? People do things that otherwise wouldn't have been done. And a lot of problems can happen from that. That's the whole reason why there was a lot of truth movements after 9/11. I mean, look at We Are Change, for example, right? This is an independent media organization that started out of 9/11, and they're still going strong to this day, sharing news exposing basically corruption or exposing a lot of lies that governments have told people. And lying is a big deal. It has a lot to do with slavery, okay? Because we're saying the honest state of humankind is for freedom and for people to live their lives and not be controlled by others. The fact that a lie can steer a whole nation into a direction that people don't want to go in tells you that people are bound to the chains of their political authorities, that the political authorities can run the narrative through and people will obey them and follow that narrative to its end. To do the master's bidding. And that's how you have the Hegelian dialectic, where you introduce a problem, you introduce a solution, and then what comes from that is a new result in the world. And that's what happened. There was excuses made for invading certain countries. That's just one example. But there was also excuses made for passing certain laws, right? But nonetheless, it just shows you if a government is capable of lying to people, what else are they capable of doing? It's more so just an example of corruption, but the main focus of the event is more so to look at the underlying mentalities of we the people. And so I'm not a person that goes into conspiracy talk that much, if you want to call it conspiracy, or any talk about events or things that it's more so speculative and people have many different perspectives of. I like to look at principles, universal timeless principles. That's what I like to look at. So that to me matters more than anything, you know what I mean? Because it applies to everybody, and it's not just one event and one time where you have to have faith on history for certain things. There's things that we can understand within our own lives, and those are principles. Those are ideas, right? So and you're mentioning a lot of things related. So I mean, you kind of see it, but the thing is that again, there's always something deeper to that. Is there such a thing as this one country, or is it rather just a bunch of people who are following the orders of this one political authority, right? I mean, which one makes more sense to you? It's what is a country? It consists of people, it consists of buildings. What is a government? It's it's just people, it's just buildings. But then we act like it's an actual tangible thing. It's meet government. It's who's government? Which one? Is it that person or that person? Which one with the tie and the person with the title and the person with the badge and the, it's right? So it gets a little confusing, but that's because the system is designed like that. And people believe in it. Hey, this is a holy text, so you gotta worship, essentially. The next videos that I'm going to show here are kind of going to detail this, some aspects of the system that are many, again, different perspectives, different aspects of the system. The first video is going to be by an older gentleman, okay? And this guy is not somebody I know personally, okay? I know a lot of people, obviously, from the summit that I've met, but he does put out a lot of great content, and this one is on slavery, and it's about 20 minutes long or so, but it really dives deep and connects the dots to a lot of what's going on. So I'm going to share that video, and then after that one, we have a video from Larkin Rose, and that one's going over the idea of relative freedom. I just want less taxes or more taxes or less this or more that. Well, are you really free if you're still being stolen from, or if you're still being violated, if you're still, having some sort of relative amount of freedom? And so we need to look at these concepts, right? And maybe you're not a person that's deep into philosophy. You don't have to be. It's really simple. Can you just summarize what you took away from these videos? What I took away from these videos? Well, I'd actually rather you take it for yourself. You don't want to stay here and watch 40 minutes of someone else's content. If you want to watch my content, you can go to my channel as well. you're on Twitch, you can go to my YouTube channel and look at my videos. Then you could also find more stuff from me if you're interested. I think there's a lot of people here who already know, seen some of my videos on a lot of this. I would recommend, if you're new to a lot of this, you sign up for the summit and just start watching, right? That's the best way to get involved. And if you don't like to watch and you want something quick and fast, you go to the featured videos section, right, where it's not an hour long, or it's not 20 minutes long. And I have some videos out there, it's like 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 7 minutes, right? All different types of times. And there's also things that you can read. There's things that, presentations you can go over. I mean, basically every single format you think about, it's there. So shouldn't be a problem on that end. So, but thank you guys, and thank you for sharing the summit as well. This is a great event. We've had quite literally hundreds of people sign up just in the past day or two, even though it started. And even though I've been promoting for the past 2 months, people are like, oh, last minute, let's hop on board. And that's okay, right? Because it's like, oh, here's a trailer, boom, and great. Awesome, and a lot of people still don't even know I'm doing these live streams. So, more people will probably know about it tomorrow. I'll tell you that. Yeah, so you will find all the information you want from the summit. I mean, literally, there's hundreds of resources and like 50 plus speakers. I mean, if you want to find something, you'll find it. And if you want more information, you can do research. You can go down a rabbit hole. And there's even people in the chat you see that are can support you if you have any specific questions, specific sources that you want for different things. But Edward, if you're talking to me about sources, I already told you what I'm looking at, which is principles, something you can understand. Okay, so big difference, but that's okay. And we're all here to guide each other in this process. If you care about freedom, then you're in the right place. I'll tell you that. No, listen. I care about freedom, and that's it. My intent is very simple. I'm not here to say, oh, well, what about this? What about that? Well, what about this? It's about, what do you understand? What do you want to do? Now, is it moral if somebody else did this to you against your will? And simple questions. A good video to start is my video on political slavery. If you want, I'll link it in the chat for you, because this is not long, and if you care about the knowledge, you'd watch it. It's got questions in it, 18 questions. And if you answer those 18 questions for yourself, you understand what I mean by sources. The source is yourself. Okay? If you have to be the one to be free, only you can free yourself. Okay? No one else is going to free you but you. That's why mental slavery, as the slaves of the past have also mentioned, and I have sources for that. It's in my book right there, literally right behind me. That's why they said, that is the most dangerous form of slavery. And so we need to, look at that. And a lot of you guys who've been staying tuned may have understand this by now. Because if any of you guys have been watching the summit by now, you realize, yeah, it's pretty simple. And I kind of get the gist of it, right? And it's great. Then you can see now there's speakers who are expanding upon those concepts. So here's the video in the chat, by the way. For Edward. There's the political slavery video that I mentioned. But anyways, let's head on to the next videos. I'm going to have to skip some here of the interviews that we just went over. Here we go.
The image of slavery as a large mass of suffering and forcibly restrained slaves controlled by a few powerful and cruel masters is a very simplistic and false view of modern slavery. Nowadays, slavery is accomplished very differently. Modern slavery is as much tactical and psychological as it is brute force. By far, the best kind of slave is one who agrees to be a slave, or who at least accepts the circumstances. And now psychological technology is used to cause people to choose slavery for themselves. I'll give you an example. Now, it's important to keep in mind that slavery was black master and black slave for many centuries before European whites took up the practice. Slavery is more about power than race. The brutal tactics and psychology of slave making are no secret. The example, in the 1700s, in the southern slave states, a wealthy landowner might have the task of setting up a plantation. Slaves would be purchased and gathered for indoctrination. The wealthy farmer would accuse a young male slave of defiance or non-compliance, and that young man would be horribly punished and killed, perhaps lynched or drawn and quartered by horses. This would be done in front of the slave women. Those slave women were deeply traumatized by the public spectacle of gratuitous violence against the innocent young black male. The slave women would then raise their sons to be compliant and subservient. Young black children would be sternly educated by their mothers in the type of behavior necessary to stay in the slave master's favor. By seeing one or more horrific event, the slave women became the school, the conditioning factory, the educators and brainwashers of the slavery collective, the new slave generation. An efficient system of slavery is not possible unless the slaves are made to enforce upon each other. By the time the black males reached adulthood, they were thoroughly conditioned by their parents and guardians to a slave's mentality and demeanor. This was the psyops of the 1700s, the shock and awe of the plantation system. Nowadays, the plantation owner is the state, the law, the police, the media, banks, and corporations, and the slaves are you and I. In the old plantations, the result of demonstrations of cruelty and violence was voluntary compliance. Young black males had never been encouraged, even by their family and friends, to think independently, to explore their aspirations and opportunities, or to believe in their own potential. Their souls and spirits were broken, their minds imprisoned, not just by the slave master, but by their own families and friends. Even when we can clearly see the slavery, we do not imagine that we are helping to create it by accepting and enforcing the rules and constraints that constitute the slavery. We warn our children to follow the rules so they will not be harmed by the state. This kind of social conditioning takes its toll. By the time the young black male plantation slave was working age, it was easy to see that he had no concept of how to question or defy authority, how to organize for justice, how to claim his rights, how to move against the system, or how to control his own destiny. No idea. This is what our state, our schools, and our media do to us and ask us to do to each other. As much as the state promotes the concept of gender equality, the state constantly exploits the differences between the genders, using gender against gender. Men are characterized as bullies or simpletons. Women are characterized as victims or protesters. Media and the state want to divide us in any way they can. Women and men have fundamentally different psychology, but they are designed to be a complementary team. Our differences are not a problem. Those differences actually make us stronger when we are partnered as a family unit. Expressed in primitive terms, the man in reckless defiance will face the enemy, whether it's an attacking tribe, the wild beast, the threat of nature's elements. The men will face the threat, while the women will protect the children, will hide, and will obey the orders of the protectors. These impulses are hardwired into the genders. Since ancient Egypt, this psychology has been exploited to create and control slaves. There need be no prison walls. There need be no constant administration of force. Slavery is programming, social and psychological programming. Force is only necessary for those who have accidentally or momentarily acted like a free and sovereign individual. Force is for people who forget to act like slaves. Regardless of how oppressed women may be in any given culture, they always have great influence over their men. Mothers have influence over their sons. Wives and female lovers have influence over their husbands and partners. By female influence, men are drawn into civilized behavior. These days, that means compliance with authorities, stable and conservative forms of livelihood, and behavioral moderation for social appearances to friends, neighbors, strangers, and authorities. And perhaps an overgeneralization, women are seeking safety and stability at all costs, while men are seeking adventure and freedom without due regard for risk. Women feel safer in a socially regulated environment, in a context of rules and monitored behavior. predictable ritual, and they press those sensibilities upon the men around them. The more reckless and coarse a man may act, the more pressure the woman will bring to regulate the behavior. So the slave master, the state, the collective, to be successful will target the woman, the rule follower, for initial compliance, and cause that woman to then pressure compliance and servitude on those around them, as they naturally tend to do. This may be called the woman's army, the front lines of the slave state, the essential mass of psychological influencers without which large-scale slavery would be impossible. Men are natural troublemakers, warriors, explorers, and there are too many of them to control with direct force by the state. Men will never be comfortable for long in the role of slave unless women are delegated to assist in the recruitment and management of the men's impulses for freedom. Women are more prone to accept and adopt rules without question. They are easily recruited to convey arbitrary rules to those around them. Women are highly influential in this way. Women are not helpless victims. They are society's best psychological influencers. They may believe they're helping the man succeed, but succeed in what? Volunteering for some form of pointless compliance, enlisting in some corrupt institutional agenda, acting like an obedient puppet to distant and mysterious control matrices, to pay all those taxes, fees, and fines, to enrich the state at crippling expense to the family and to society, to avoid conflict no matter what the cost. Women's civilizing influence was very effective and necessary in more barbaric times. The woman's good intentions have now been seized and repurposed as a mechanism of state control, as a way to assert central authority. Again, I speak very generally. There are many women who value freedom, opportunity, and the prosperity it brings. However, there are many others who adopt and advocate senseless rules and processes simply because they believe it will lead to social harmony. It leads to slavery. Men are sensitive to the wishes of the women around them. We can be pushed into unnatural states by those we love and trust. You can have a responsible and confident man, or you can have a compliant and conforming man, but you cannot have both of those things in full measure in one man. You get compliance at the cost of responsibility and confidence. A man cannot think for himself while he's under heavy social pressure to conform to arbitrary behavioral controls. So how can the woman bring out the best in her man? Ease off on the manipulation, encourage leadership and independent thinking? Perhaps, but it's actually, the fact is, being a man is the man's job. The man and the woman have to understand that they have different psychology and different roles in the relationship. Not necessarily traditional roles, but complementary roles based on their particular personalities, skills, and temperaments. A good relationship is not one where one person is controlling another. It is one where each person is supporting the other. It is cooperation and shared purpose. Where the partner is strong, encourage that strength. Where the partner is weak, provide support. Never compete within the team. Eliminate all internal conflict. Apply the full partnership to the external goals. Regardless of gender, if we pressure each other in any way to become something we are not, to stop questioning authority, to accept whatever corruption, control, and taxation comes with a promise of peace and order, we are inviting and enabling our own slavery. The promise of protection from outside is always false, is always a Trojan horse, is always a lure, and it is a lie. Compliance of the masses is not merely important to the state. Compliance is not something the state merely desires. Without compliance of the masses, there is no state. The term slavery and the term compliance are basically synonymous. Servitude and submission to institutional and collective agendas corrupts the natural, local, and family cultures. And by participating, we forfeit essential independence and self-determination not to mention our wealth and our futures. We must not devote our lives to a corporation unless we know that corporation is equally dedicated to us and our families. The sociopathic and despotic politician or the corporate-controlled media can make laws and rules, can give us commands, tell us how to behave. They can take our money, our property, our freedom, and opportunity. But how can we fight that when our friends and family members are repeating those same commands and values to us as if it was their idea? The problem is that we repeat to each other what we hear from our media, our institutions, our corrupt politicians, and our government-controlled school teachers. And we must begin to think for ourselves. We become puppets and parrots of the repetitious messages we hear, and we allow those messages to reach us constantly. We flood ourselves with media and entertainment, packed with subliminal messages and contrived behavioral examples. We immerse ourselves in behavioral programming day in and day out. The state teaches us to see all rules and all laws as good, and all violators of those rules as bad. And this leaves no room for free thought or self-determination, no chance for reform of state-sponsored injustice, no ambition for personal advancement. We give corruption and tyranny a free pass, and we defeat freedom, rights, and hope for personal prosperity by dreaming of how we can better please the plantation master, as we hope that by pleasing that master we may receive an extra helping of beans. We're taught to never think for ourselves, to regard the largest, strongest, wealthiest institution as the one we must trust and join, and whose rules we must follow. We find ourselves seeking and attaching ourselves to the nearest slave master, because we have been told that is how our success shall be defined and measured. We will not be respected for our independence and creative thought, our self-reliance. We will be respected for the membership card we carry, because we're not free men, we're slaves. When we see all media and public officials as wise, powerful, honest, and all citizens as subject to their decrees, we create a huge temptation for those who would enslave us, exploit us, tax us, rob us, own us, control us. There is a class of person who finds personal gratification in controlling others, planning for others, administering the lives of others. Those people are drawn to public service and high corporate office for that purpose. The sociopath gets a natural thrill from controlling people as objects for his own personal gain, to push people around as if they were on some chessboard, to call them not people, but human resources. You are a resource, not for yourself, but for the collective, the planners, the manipulators, the slave masters. You are a resource to be applied and consumed for the benefit of the collective. And you are presumed to agree with that, unless you act otherwise. Many of us are perfectly willing to be dependent on public and commercial services without realizing this puts us in obligation of compliance, debt, and service to that system. But that system only exists to take what we have. Dependence is the mechanism through which you may be controlled and impoverished. There's no politician or bureaucrat who knows, loves, and protects you. If you're being offered something by an institution or a stranger, you are being lured into a trap. If it wasn't your idea, if you don't control it, you are a servant to it if you join, if you consent, if you participate, if you agree. Rules are always made to advantage the rule maker. A perfect example is traffic violation fines. The fine you pay enriches the court. It does not provide remedy to the victim because there is no victim. It is not a system of justice. It is a system of state enrichment. It is slavery. We were born to be responsible for ourselves. The adoption of external rules is fully artificial. If you are not making your own rules, you are being ruled. There's no safety or security in a system that keeps secrets from you, that takes and hides money from you, claims a monopoly on violence, and which uses that violence on a regular basis. A system which secretly creates massive crises so that it can offer fake solutions to those crises. And the solutions turn out to be more control, more taxation, fewer opportunities, rights, and freedoms. States are not benevolent paternal orders. States are human farms. We're all deeply conditioned for compliance by everyone around us. We're conditioned to have no integrity, no internal moral compass, no self-reliance, no curiosity, no doubt of authority. We are instead programmed with self-doubt and fear of failure in the eyes of some unseen slave master. We are kept in a state of fear and doubt by relentless media and political fear-mongering. We are convinced that we must pay great attention to our choices of detergent and chewing gum. We don't create and live by our own standards, overcome our own fears and weaknesses. We strive to define ourselves by meeting the standards of others. Imagine there are three kinds of people: those who control only themselves, those who control others, and those who are controlled by others. It is very obvious which of these three are healthier and more true to justice and human nature. It is very obvious that if you are being controlled by others, you are at the bottom of the social totem pole. If you are letting yourself be controlled, you are volunteering into slavery. We must begin to ask ourselves why a lifetime of work can produce nothing but a pile of debt. What is it about our laws, our institutions, our society that does that to us? Maybe compliance is not the solution. Maybe debt is harming us. Maybe consuming media propaganda all day has changed our mentality. Maybe institutions and corporations are constantly assaulting us with manipulations and diversions. Maybe they are sucking the life out of us. Maybe they are parasites. Our challenge in life as potentially free and independent individuals is to overcome the damage done to us in our youth as we were told to listen and obey. The damage that media and social conditioning do to us. The damage we do to each other. Parental mistakes. State propaganda, whatever. Our job as responsible adults is to discover and break the chains that are now invisible but tight around our necks, our heads, and our hearts. In the days of chained slavery, they needed to literally break the chains. In the days of psychological slavery, all we need to do is deny consent. Start questioning things and start making our own decisions. We cannot do this unless we start thinking more broadly, to wake up and recognize that slavery is all around us, and we are part of it. You didn't think you were a slave? You have a right to own property. Can you own property without paying lifelong taxation for simply exercising that right? You have a right to keep what you earn. Are your part of your earnings taken in unpaid servitude? You have a right to be left alone, yet innocent people have their property and liberty foreclosed on a daily basis, not for any real crime, but for non-compliance, for nothing other than defiance of the slave master, for behavior that threatens the sociopathic judge or police officer, or simply enrich those who have borrowed the state-granted privilege to take what is yours. Can you even exercise your right to travel without paying for licenses for your vehicle and yourself as a driver? You are being taxed and penalized for exercising your rights. The law says your rights may not be infringed. Our labor, our freedom, our rights are being taken every day. We are slaves. In the USA, we have more than 5 times as many people in prison per capita than even the most overtly oppressive regimes on the entire planet. 85% of the people in our prisons committed no property damage, no violence or injury. 85% for what are called crimes when there was no victim. So for harmless behavioral non-compliance, you can go to prison for 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. It happens every day. This is not a free state, and as I speak, the police are militarizing. slavery is about to go to a whole new level. The good news is most of it happens simply because we consent. We don't question. We don't hold public servants accountable. We don't demand their swift removal when they displease us. These mistakes are easy to change. People cannot be governed without their consent. If people are giving blind consent, complying, never questioning, never speaking out, they can not only be governed, they can be abused, taxed, imprisoned, or killed without consequences. The powers that be have clearly shown that they will take everything and anything that we allow them to take, anything we don't vigorously protect and defend, and they will never punish their own for the crimes they commit against us. Try to see yourself as the powerful elites see you. You are not regarded by greedy public institutions as free and independent people. You are presumed to be agreeing and complying with their agendas, plans, rules, and programs. You are presumed to be obligated and subject to punishment for non-compliance of policies you had nothing to do with creating. You are expected to pay your fees and taxes, to adjust your behavior, and to warn those around you to do the same. You are presumed to agree to all that because they found that when they presume you to be a slave, that many of us will play along. They seized upon our psychological flaws and weaknesses as the primary mechanism of their control. We're so conditioned that government can now create slaves by simply expecting us to be slaves. That is why any government, state, collective, or dictator will always claim the support of the silent. They simply invent the idea that you wish to be controlled, and then they will proceed to control you unless you resist. If you're looking around at what government and corporate interests are doing, if you can see where it is leading, it should be very clear that we had better start making some noise. We had better start providing some resistance. Any casual observer can tell you that what we now have is an emerging police state. Of course, we're told we have a free country, so that our eyes will glaze over in reflexive national pride. In the 1960s, reactionary nationalists used to say, "America, love it or leave it." Those who were more observant and thoughtful would answer, "America, change it or lose it." That was 50 years ago. We didn't change it, and we're now losing it. How do we get America back? How do we regain freedom and opportunity and prosperity? By refusing to be slaves, by turning off the propaganda, by setting our own goals and making our own decisions, by questioning authority, by commanding our own lives.
Hey, Larkin Rose here. So many people commented about my awesome cable management that I'm doing this video from underneath my studio so that you can properly admire my cable management, or lack thereof. Did you know that when it comes to human skin and sensing temperature, we don't so much sense temperature directly as we sense changes in temperature? So, for example, if there's a cold pool and you get in it right away and your skin's warmer than the pool, it feels really cold. But if it's only 10 degrees colder, your skin gets cold and then it stops feeling cold because the differential between the two is minuscule. And the other way around, if you're out and it's 100 degrees out and you're running around and exercising and all that, and you come inside, even if it's 70 degrees inside, it will feel cold because of the temperature differential in your skin. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it kind of relates to how most people view freedom, because they don't really understand freedom, and when it comes to politics, they judge what should be based on the differential between what they wish there was and what there actually is. But they don't actually have principles. They don't actually have an ideal that they believe in. They believe in relative freedom. So they want slightly less extortion than we have now, for example, or slightly more extortion. But the entire political spectrum, left and right, isn't an argument over any principles. Neither of them have an actual set of beliefs that they can lay out, as in government should do this but not this, it should tax this much, it should regulate this but not that. They don't have any principles. They just have bickering over where we are. So if the extortion rate is like here, 50%, 40%, wherever it is, and the Republicans are like, well, we want a little bit less extortion. And the Democrats are like, well, we want a little bit more extortion, but mostly for the evil rich. They imagine themselves to be different and in opposite directions because compared to where we might be right now, they're in opposite directions. But objectively, when it comes to reality, they're here and here on the whole spectrum of what there could be. This being complete slavery, 100% robbery, and this being no robbery. They think they're diametrically opposed and extreme opposites, and they're the same stinking thing. The only difference is one wants it nudged a little bit this way from where it is, one wants it nudged a little bit that way from where it is, and it's the same on literally every issue. The Republicans are known as warmongers, which they are, and so are the Democrats. They just complain about certain warmongering. We want less of that warmongering and more of this warmongering over here. When it comes to gun control, the Republicans pretend to be against it. No, they're not. They pushed and they passed a bunch of the federal gun control that exists now. The ATF is federal gun control. It's 100% unconstitutional. Nope, none of the Republicans seem to care. The federal outlawing of machine guns without going through the process of getting a special permit is completely unconstitutional, and almost all Republicans go, of course you have to have that. Of course you have to have this much unjust, immoral, obviously unconstitutional gun control, but we want a little bit less than what we have now, but the Democrats want a little bit more. That makes us extreme opposites. No, here's the spectrum. You're both in the authoritarian, moderate center of not having freedom. And there's nothing principled about that. And in fact, it's basically the boiled frog thing. Because if you took those same Democrats and Republicans and you put them in a time where that line was somewhere else, like if taxation gets worse, or even if taxation gets better, they're both going to be right on either side of the line bickering about it. And it's with literally every issue. Social Security. Well, we should spend a little bit less on Social Security, and they think you should spend a little bit more. Okay, so you're both in favor of a giant unconstitutional Ponzi scheme where we rob the future children to give handouts to buy the loyalty of the current old people. Both parties absolutely believe in that, and they bicker over this tiny little range, and because where we are is in between what they're bickering about, they imagine that they're opposites. No, they're not. By any objective measure, if here's the grand scale of all the way communism with government stealing everything and giving us what we need over here and actual freedom over here, Democrats and Republicans are here. This is their entire spectrum. And the only reason they can even pretend to be at all fundamentally different is because people have a relative view of what should be based on what is right now. And if they want a little bit more of this than what is, or a little bit less of this, that's completely unprincipled and it's completely insane. And it's the equivalent of saying, well, there's this many murders a year, and I want a 20% decrease in the number of murders per year, and they want a 20% increase. Well, you're both insane and evil. You both advocate murder. The fact that you advocate a little bit less than somebody else doesn't make you a good person. It makes you a lunatic. It makes you an immoral psychopath who happens to advocate a slightly smaller degree of evil than the other immoral psychopath. But that comparison game is what the establishment uses to trick people into advocating evil. Because if you're advocating evil that's not quite as bad as what we have right now, you can imagine yourself to be pro-freedom. I did when I was a statist, because I wanted a little bit less federal extortion and a little bit less government control of it. I didn't believe in freedom. I believed in whining for a slightly nicer master, and I thought that made me pro-freedom. No, it didn't. That's ridiculous. So my question for you is, if it were up to you, not based on today, where we are today, or 100 years ago, or 100 years in the future, if it were up to you, how much money do you want government to forcibly steal from me to fund whatever? What do you want it to spend that on? And if your answer has anything to do with what they're doing right now, like, well, I think there should be tax cuts, that you're just an unprincipled statist. I want a little bit less extortion. That doesn't make you anti-extortion. It makes you 100% pro-extortion. You just want to rob people slightly less than somebody else wants to rob. But you're 100% pro-extortion. Because the only position that is 0% pro-extortion is opposing all involuntary taxation. And involuntary taxation is redundant. If it's voluntary, it's not taxation. So if you're a Republican and you want slightly less robbery than what we have today, you're pro-robbery. If you want slightly less redistribution of wealth, you're pro-communism. If you want slightly less gun control, you're pro-gun control and anti-freedom. And that's true on every issue. And by the way, the parties take turns being on different sides. Well, we, the liberals, believe more in civil rights. No, you stinking don't. You might find a particular thing here and there to nitpick about when it comes to individual rights that maybe the Republicans are on that side of where we are and you're on this side of where you are nowhere near believing in individual freedom. Neither side is. But as long as people can think in terms of where we are now as the starting point, and you want to nudge it a little bit that way or a little bit that way, as if that has anything to do with a principle or a coherent philosophy, then they can all feel like, well, I stand for something. No, you don't. Because the line can just move around and you're just going to move with it because you had no principles. If they double taxes, well, you can't double it too far because then it goes over 100%. But if they double it and you want a little bit less, you still want more than there is now. If your position is relative to wherever we are, you don't have a position. You don't have principles. You're just arbitrarily whining for somewhere along the line that has nothing to do with anything like a coherent philosophy. So we will be back after these short words from not our sponsor, because I don't take sponsors, but from Amandy.
Are you one of those people who has watched Larkin Rose's videos for years but never donated anything? Well, you can just keep doing that, or you can check the description below and donate a little bit, and every time you see one of these videos in the future, you'll know you were part of the 1% of people that helped to make these happen. Have a good day.
Welcome back. So, given what I just explained, would you like to be somebody who has principles? And instead of just saying, well, this guy beats his wife twice a week, and I want him to only beat his wife once a week, they want him to beat his wife 3 times a week. Like, all of those options are evil. If you want to keep playing the game of bickering over which evil to have, which every Democrat and Republican does, you can keep doing that. If you want to be a moral, principled human being, then start to ask yourself the question, how much do you want me and all your neighbors and all the millions of people you don't know, how much do you think they should be robbed to fund things they don't want? Because I think they should be robbed 0. And that has nothing to do with how much they're being robbed right now. I don't want people robbed half of what they're being robbed today, or assaulted 73% of how much they got assaulted last week. I want them not robbed at all. I want them not assaulted at all. That's called having a principle. That's called being moral. No Republican and no Democrat is that. And the sad thing is, and a bunch of people, even statists, know this. What Republicans push for now is basically what Democrats pushed for 10 years ago, because the line moves. So the Republicans were like, we should only have this much taxation. Well, 10 years ago, we were here and the Democrats were pushing for this, and you were saying that's the end of the world, that's communism. Now you're advocating that because you have no principles And now that the line of where we are is over here, you think you're super duper pro-freedom for advocating what those horrible communists advocated 10 years ago when you were screaming at them and condemning them. And it's the same thing in the other direction, with the other political party saying, well, we believe in this freedom more than they believe in. None of them believe in freedom at all in anything. None of them. No Democrat and no Republican actually believes in freedom at all. They can only pretend to believe in freedom if they're comparing what they advocate to what we have today. And that's just insane. Because you can get all the way to North Korea. That's about the worst example I can think of right now. If you were in North Korea, what are you going to advocate? I advocate slightly fewer murders of people critical of government. Oh, good for you. That's so noble. You're so pro-freedom and awesome. I really admire your principles. No, you have none. If you don't advocate all the way freedom, including for people who disagree with you, then you don't advocate freedom. If you're a slave and you advocate half the whippings that the master did last week, you're pro-slavery and pro-whipping. The fact that it might have been worse or somebody else might advocate something worse doesn't change the fact that you are an advocate of evil. And that's what it boils down to. All the people are like, well, they're so bad that I'm certainly not voting for them. And both parties do it. Democrats, anybody but Trump. Trump is completely horrible. And so are all the people you vote for. Meanwhile, the Republicans are like, they're totally communists, anybody but them. And then they vote for evil people. Both sides vote for evil people because neither of them has a principle. Neither of them actually has a coherent philosophy. And they're just bickering over how far that line should move in tiny little increments from where it is. Even though where it is, a zillion miles from where it was at the beginning of the country, or even 50 years ago. And if that line can parade towards totalitarianism, and you're still just bickering about this range, you're pro-totalitarian. Because when it gets all the way over here and you're still bickering about that range, what's the stinking difference? Then you're whining about whether you want fascism and communism, and guess what? In practice, they're the same stinking thing. The Third Reich and the Soviet Union, do you think either one of them was awesome? No, they were just bickering over where to draw the line of authoritarian collectivism, rob everybody and controlling everybody's lives. If you want to be principled, a whole lot of these questions are digital, not analog. And by that I mean, there's a big analog scale of how much robbery do you condone? 27%? 35%? 71%? If it's above 0, you're pro-slavery, you're pro-extortion. If it's 0, you believe in freedom, at least in that way. And that you can run right down the list of political and legal issues, and it's the same for all of them. If you advocate against freedom, which every single Democrat and every single Republican does, there's no principle there. And you're just a dupe for the worst people in the world, because the people who designed this game and let you vote and let you bicker about, well, here's the line, but you can decide which side of this line you want to be on. You sure as hell can't decide to be actually free, but you can bicker about this. And the people right here can get so mad at the people right here, and the people right here can be so mad at the people right here. And meanwhile, your masters are laughing their asses off at you because you're both cheering for this much of your own enslavement. And you're too indoctrinated to know it. So, if it were up to you, not compared to today, not, well, I would hope to push for this. If it were up to you, how much do you want me to be robbed? How much do you want your neighbors to be robbed? How much do you want their choices forcibly controlled and restricted and limited by an authoritarian ruling class? I want 0, because A, I'm a voluntarist, and B, I'm moral, and C, I have principles. If you believe in government, you don't. Sorry. You can't, because if you believe in government, that means you believe in some robbery. Well, that puts you on the pro-robbery scale. You believe in some warmongering. That puts you on the pro-warmongering scale. You believe in some authoritarian domination controlling people's peaceful decisions. Well, that puts you clearly in the anti-freedom spectrum. So, you don't have to answer to me. You probably don't even know me. Who cares what I think? Do you dare to answer for yourself? What is it that you advocate? Not compared to what we have right now, but if it were all the way up to you, what do you really condone? A 13% decrease in violent evil aggression? Because you're still pro-violent evil aggression, if that's the case. If you want a 100% decrease in violent evil aggression, good for you. I'm on your side. And the fact that we're unlikely to get there anytime soon, that doesn't change the fact that that's what you should condone. And so the last thing I'll say is, if your excuse for bickering over the line, whether it should be here or here, is, well, it's going to be one or the other. One of them is going to win. Therefore, I'm going to advocate it. Think of what you're saying. That is the identical argument to me saying, well, I would oppose murder and rape and assault and theft. I would oppose all those evil things, but they're going to happen anyway. So I'm going to advocate a moderate amount of murder and rape and theft and assault. Is that sane? Is that moral? No. Is the fact that those things are going to keep happening to one degree or another, does that change whether I should advocate 0? No, I should advocate 0. So I don't care what you predict is going to happen or what other people will advocate or what government's going to do. I care what you are advocating and trying to make happen. And if you are advocating and supporting and trying to make happen authoritarian collectivism that violently robs all your neighbors, then you're the problem. And pointing to somebody else who goes, he's even worse, doesn't matter, you're still the problem. And so is he. But that doesn't change the fact that you are too. The only people who aren't the problem are the people who say, I don't want anybody robbed. Some are going to be, but I'm not going to advocate that. I'm not going to vote for it. I'm not going to support it with my words. I don't want anybody violently dominated. If they're not hurting or threatening anybody else, I want them left alone. I want them left in freedom. That is the only principled position to have. So if you don't have that position, and if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you absolutely don't have that position. When I was a statist, I didn't have that position. If you don't have the position of actually wanting pro-freedom for everybody, you are one of the people cheering for injustice, regardless of where the line is and where you're whining about it should be over here and should be over there. Whatever the rest of the world is going to advocate, whatever the rest of the world is going to say, whoever they're going to vote for, whatever they're going to do, you control what you advocate, what you support, and what you vote for. And as long as you are voting for and empowering authoritarian psychos, bickering about which one is worse than the other one and bickering about where the line should be, doesn't change the fact that you are what's wrong with the world. Stop being what's wrong with the world.
All right. Who's been sticking around all this time? I want to know. But anyways, it's been nice getting out, reaching out to the audiences of the world, one way or another, and bringing people together. So, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate it. There's the music. Thank you everybody. And I'll see you tomorrow in case you come back. Appreciate it. Stay tuned. A lot more to come.